Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt that books can watch you? That the words on their pages are not just ink but eyes, countless eyes following your every move? I never did. Not until that day at Blackridge Library. My name is Thomas Mercer, and I've spent 15 years as a rare book authenticator and restorer. After my divorce last year, I threw myself into work, accepting projects others might find tedious. When Blackridge University contacted me about restoring texts from their abandoned East Wing library, I accepted immediately. The building had been closed for decades following structural concerns, but recent funding had earmarked it for renovation. The library stood like a Victorian mourner, draped in shadows despite the bright April morning. The university's head archivist, Dr. Eleanor Webb, met me at the entrance, her thin frame nearly lost in the massive doorway. Most of the collection has been relocated, she explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. But the basement archive wasn't cataloged properly before the closure. We need an expert to determine what's salvageable. I nodded, focusing on the dust patterns swirling in the slim beams of light from boarded windows. Something about them seemed intentional, almost like patterns or symbols. The power's been reconnected, but the wiring is old, Dr. Webb continued, flicking a switch that illuminated a series of dim bulbs. Some sections still have no electricity. I've left lanterns and flashlights downstairs. As we descended the stone staircase to the basement, the temperature dropped noticeably. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb what little light existed. My footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes seeming to continue after I'd stopped moving. These cabinets contain the uncatalogued materials, Dr. Webb said, gesturing to rows of metal filing cabinets and wooden cases. Take your time. Some of these haven't been touched in over a century. After Dr. Webb left, I placed my restoration kit on a dusty table and pulled on my cotton gloves. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing. I opened the first cabinet, revealing stacks of leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked with age. For the first hour, I found nothing unusual, just standard academic texts from the late 19th century. But in the third drawer, beneath several damaged periodicals, I discovered a slim volume bound in what appeared to be dark red leather. The binding had no title, only an embossed symbol resembling a spiral with tiny marks along its curve. When I opened it, a strange smell emerged, not the usual mustiness of old books, but something sharper, like copper and herbs. The text was handwritten in faded brown ink in a language I didn't recognize. Interspersed throughout were detailed illustrations of circular arrangements of symbols and what appeared to be instructions. As I turned the pages, the air around me seemed to thicken. The single bulb overhead flickered briefly, and I glanced up, noticing for the first time how the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should be. Was that movement in the periphery of my vision? I returned to the book, photographing several pages for later translation. As I worked, I became increasingly aware of a soft sound, like whispers just below the threshold of hearing. I paused, listening intently. Nothing. Just the occasional settling of the old building. But when I resumed my examination, the whispers returned, multiple voices speaking urgently in hushed tones. I spun around, heart racing. Hello? Is someone there? The basement remained empty, but the shadows at the far end seemed to shift slightly, as if disturbed by my voice. Logic told me it was just air moving through the ventilation system, but something primitive in my brain wasn't convinced. I checked my watch. I'd been working for 3 hours without a break. Fatigue was making me imagine things. I decided to take a short break and explore the rest of the basement. As I walked down the narrow aisles between shelves, I noticed more books with similar bindings to the first, all without titles, all bearing various embossed symbols. I collected several, creating a small stack on my work table. When I returned to my chair, I froze. The first book lay open, not to the page where I'd left it, but to an illustration of a human figure surrounded by concentric circles filled with symbols. Hadn't I closed it before walking away? I must have left it open. There was no other explanation. As I sat down, the light flickered again, longer this time, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When it returned, I could have sworn the illustration had changed, the human figure now depicted with its head turned, as if looking out from the page. I blinked hard and looked again. The figure was as before, facing forward. My hands trembled slightly as I turned to the next page. More symbols, more diagrams, and text that seemed to swim before my eyes, the characters shifting and rearranging themselves. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck, like cold fingers trailing across my skin. I jerked around, knocking my chair over. Nothing was there. But the silence had changed. It felt anticipatory, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. "Get it together, Thomas," I muttered, readying my chair. I decided to focus on cataloging rather than detailed examination. I would take the books upstairs where there was better light and more air. As I began packing them into my bag, my flashlight batteries died. The bulb overhead flickered more insistently, and then with a soft pop, went out completely. In the sudden darkness, the whispers returned, louder now, more distinct, though I still couldn't make out words. My hands fumbled for the spare flashlight Dr. Webb had mentioned. Finding it, I flicked it on, relief flooding through me as a beam of light cut through the blackness. I swept the light across the room, stopping when I reached the far corner. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a figure standing there. Not a person, but something tall and thin, with too many angles. Then the beam passed over empty space. My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly gathered my tools and the books, shoving them into my bag. The whispers followed me as I hurried toward the stairs, growing in intensity until they seemed to press against my eardrums. At the base of the stairs, I glanced back one final time. In the dim glow of my flashlight, the shadows seemed to pulse and breathe, contracting and expanding like living organisms. And in the center of my work table, the first book lay open once more, though I was certain I'd packed it away. I didn't look back again as I climbed the stairs, the whispers chasing me all the way to the top. When I burst through the door into the main floor, the afternoon sunlight streaming through broken boards nearly blinded me. The whispers instantly ceased. Dr. Webb found me sitting on the front steps, my bag clutched tightly to my chest. "Are you all right, Mr. Mercer? You look pale." Just a long day," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've collected some interesting volumes for detailed analysis. I'll need to take them with me." That night, in my hotel room, I laid the books out on the desk. Under the bright modern lighting, they looked harmless, just old, worn books. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling they were somehow different from when I found them. As I fell into uneasy sleep, the last thing I saw was the stack of books on my desk, and I could have sworn the top one was slightly open, though I'd closed them all. And in my dreams, I heard the whispers again, but this time I could almost understand what they were saying. I awoke with a start, my body drenched in sweat despite the room's chill. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:33. Always 3:33. This marked the third consecutive night I'd opened my eyes at exactly this time, heart racing as if I'd been running. The dream lingered like a film over my thoughts, whispers growing into chants, symbols from the book swirling and rearranging themselves into new patterns. But this time, something had changed. In the dream, I understood the words. I had spoken them aloud, feeling them roll off my tongue with disturbing familiarity. I switched on the lamp, its warm glow doing little to dispel my unease. The books sat on the desk across the room, exactly as I'd left them. Or were they? I squinted, trying to focus my sleep-blurred vision. Was the arrangement slightly different? Had the red leather volume moved from the bottom of the stack to the top? "You're losing it, Thomas," I muttered, rubbing my face with trembling hands. I'd spent the last 2 days translating Micah from the texts. My linguistics software had failed to identify the language precisely, suggesting it might be a hybrid of several ancient dialects. Yet somehow, I found myself making progress, instinctively grasping connections between symbols and phrases that should have remained impenetrable. Giving up on sleep, I pulled on a sweater and moved to the desk. Despite the hotel room's heating, the air around the books felt noticeably colder. I opened the red volume, turning to the page I'd been studying yesterday, a detailed circular diagram surrounded by text. The diagram depicted what appeared to be a ritual space, with precise measurements and orientations marked in faded ink. As I stared at it, something clicked in my mind. The layout was familiar. Disturbingly familiar. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the floor plan of Blackridge Library's basement that Dr. Webb had provided. Overlaying the diagram from the book revealed an unmistakable correlation. The ritual circle in the book aligned perfectly with the arrangement of filing cabinets and shelves in the section where I'd found the volumes. A coincidence? Or had someone deliberately arranged the furniture to match the diagram? My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Dr. Webb's name flashed on the screen. "Mr. Mercer," her voice sounded strained. "Have you made any progress with the texts?" "Some," I replied cautiously. "They appear to be ritual manuals of some kind. Possibly 18th century, though the language suggests older origins." A pause. "Have you attempted any of the rituals?" The question struck me as odd. "Of course not. I'm just translating and cataloging." "Good." Her relief was palpable. "I've been doing some research on the library's history. It seems the East Wing was originally funded by a group called the Blackridge Antiquarian Society. They were officially dedicated to historical preservation, but there are rumors they practiced some form of ritual magic." My mouth went dry. "What kind of magic?" "The records are vague. But there were several disappearances associated with the society in the late 1800s. Students and faculty who were last seen entering the library." I glanced at the books. "Why are you telling me this now?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because the construction crew found something yesterday, after you left. Behind one of the walls in the basement. Human remains. At least 3 individuals, possibly more." My heart seemed to stop. "Have you called the police?" "They're treating it as a historical find. The bodies appear to be well over a century old." She hesitated. "There's something else. They were arranged in a circle. Like the diagram. Exactly like the diagram I was looking at right now." "I think you should return the books, Mr. Mercer," Dr. Webb said softly. "Today, if possible." After hanging up, I sat staring at the volumes spread across my desk. The rational part of my brain suggested this was just an unnerving coincidence. Old buildings often contain macabre secrets. But another part, a primitive part that responded to shadows and whispers, screamed danger. I needed fresh air. Pulling on my coat, I stepped out of the hotel into the pre-dawn darkness. The streets were empty, streetlights casting pools of yellowish illumination on wet pavement. Last night's rain had left everything slick and reflective. As I walked, the cold air cleared my head. What was I afraid of? Books couldn't harm me. Ancient rituals held no power unless you believed in them. I was a scholar, not a superstitious fool. A sound behind me, footsteps echoing my own. I turned, seeing only empty sidewalks stretching back toward the hotel. But when I resumed walking, so did the phantom steps, perfectly synchronized but slightly louder, as if someone larger were following. I quickened my pace. So did the steps. I stopped abruptly. Silence. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the vast darkness between streetlights. No response, but the air seemed to thicken around me, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. A sudden gust of wind scattered fallen leaves across the pavement. As they danced in the breeze, they momentarily formed a pattern, the same spiral symbol from the book's cover. Heart pounding, I hurried back to the hotel, no longer caring if the footsteps followed. Inside my room, I threw the deadbolt and chain, then stood with my back against the door, breathing heavily. The books lay spread across the desk, exactly as I'd left them. Except, I was certain I hadn't left any of them open. Yet the red volume now lay open to a page I'd never seen before. I approached cautiously. The page contained an illustration of a thin, elongated figure standing behind a sleeping person. The figure had no distinct features, just a blank oval where a face should be, and two long arms that reached toward the sleeper. Below it, text in that strange hybrid language. But now, impossibly, I could read it perfectly. The watcher comes first. It stands in shadows, learning your scent, your sound, your soul. It follows. It whispers. It prepares the way for what comes after. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. More illustrations appeared, figures performing rituals, strange symbols, and diagrams of what looked like doorways or portals. And everywhere, text that should have been indecipherable but now made perfect, terrible sense to me. Rituals to thin the veil between worlds. Indications to entities with unpronounceable names. Detailed instructions for summoning things that should not exist. A realization hit me with sickening force. I hadn't been translating the text these past 2 days. It had been translating itself for me. I grabbed my phone to call Dr. Webb, but the screen remained black despite repeated attempts to power it on. The digital clock on the nightstand now read 3:33 again, though hours had passed since I'd awakened. The room's temperature plummeted suddenly, my breath fogging in front of my face. The whispers returned, no longer at the edge of hearing but clear and distinct, emanating from the books themselves. Multiple voices speaking in unison, reciting phrases I now understood all too well. I backed away from the desk, bumping into the bed. The lamp flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the room into darkness broken only by thin strips of light around the heavy curtains. In that dimness, I saw them, shadows darker than the surrounding darkness, moving across the walls. Not random shapes, but deliberate forms with substance and intent. They flowed like liquid, converging at the center of the room, directly above the open book. The whispering intensified, becoming a chant. The shadows began to coalesce, forming a vertical shape that stretched from floor to ceiling. A doorway. A portal. Just like the illustrations. And through it, something was coming. I lunged for the door, fumbling with the chain and deadbolt. Behind me, the temperature dropped further as the shadow portal widened. The voices reached a fevered pitch, no longer whispers but shrieks that existed somehow inside my head rather than in the air. Finally, the door swung open, and I stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. I ran toward the stairs, unwilling to wait for the elevator, the screaming voices pursuing me even as I fled the building into the now bright morning. I didn't stop running until I reached Blackridge Library, where Dr. Webb waited on the steps, her face grave. "You've seen it," she said. Not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "It wasn't coincidence that the university hired you, Mr. Mercer," she continued quietly. "We needed someone with your specific sensitivity." "What are you talking about?" "Your grandmother was Eliza Mercer, wasn't she? One of the last members of the Blackridge Antiquarian Society." The world tilted around me. How could she know about my grandmother? I'd barely known her myself, just vague childhood memories of a stern woman who told strange stories and taught me odd rhymes I could never quite remember. "The society didn't end," Dr. Webb said. "It evolved. And now it needs you to complete what was started over a century ago." Behind her, the library's doors swung open of their own accord. From the darkness beyond, whispers called my name. "I don't understand," I said, taking an involuntary step backward. "What does my grandmother have to do with any of this?" Dr. Webb's face remained impassive, but her eyes gleamed with something I couldn't identify. Anticipation, perhaps. Or hunger. The Blackridge Antiquarian Society wasn't just collecting books, Mr. Mercer. They were seeking knowledge, specific knowledge about the spaces between worlds. Your grandmother was particularly gifted at translation. The texts responded to her, just as they're responding to you now. My mind reeled. The strange books my grandmother kept locked in a cabinet. The midnight whispers I'd sometimes heard from her study as a child. The way she'd look at me with mingled hope and fear, as if measuring me against some unknown standard. "The rituals require a bloodline connection," Dr. Webb continued. "We've tried with others. It doesn't end well." I glanced back toward town, considering running, but my legs felt leaden. Around us, the morning had grown unnaturally still. No bird sang. No wind disturbed the trees. Even the air seemed suspended, waiting. What happens if I refuse? A thin smile stretched across Dr. Webb's face. "Look at your hands, Mr. Mercer." I raised them, then gasped in horror. Thin, black lines had begun tracing themselves across my skin, following the patterns of veins and arteries. They pulsed slightly, as if alive. "The books have chosen you," she said softly. "You began the translation. You opened the way. It cannot be closed except by completing what was started." And what exactly was started? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "A doorway. A permanent one." She gestured toward the library. "Come. I'll show you." Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the black lines on my skin burned now, compelling me forward. I followed Dr. Webb through the massive doors and into the dim interior. The library looked different in daylight, dust motes dancing in shafts of light, the wooden panels gleaming with subtle iridescence that shouldn't have been possible. We descended the stairs to the basement. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if I were walking deeper into earth than the building structure should have allowed. By the time we reached the bottom, the quality of air had changed, thicker, older, with that same copper and herb scent from the books. The basement had been transformed. The filing cabinets and bookshelves had been arranged in a perfect circle, matching the diagram from the red volume. In the center, the floor had been cleared, revealing ancient flagstones inscribed with the same symbols I'd been translating. And standing around the circle were people, 7 of them, wearing dark academic robes that seemed simultaneously modern and archaic. Their faces were ordinary, middle-aged professors and administrators I might pass without a second glance on a university campus. But their eyes were wrong, reflecting too much light in this dim space. The current members of the society, Dr. Webb explained. We've been waiting a very long time for someone like you. One of them stepped forward, an elderly man with a neatly trimmed white beard. Thomas Mercer, he said, my name sounding like an incantation on his lips. Grandson of Eliza. The circle is complete again. The black lines on my hands had spread up my arms, disappearing under my sleeves. I could feel them crawling across my chest, around my neck, up toward my face. With each new line, memories surfaced, not my own, but my grandmother's. Rituals performed in this very room. Pages translated by candlelight. And something glimpsed through a temporary door, something vast and ancient that promised knowledge beyond human comprehension. What do you want from me? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. The bearded man gestured to the center of the circle. The final translation must be spoken aloud by one of the bloodline. Eliza began the work. You will complete it. As if responding to his words, the red book materialized on a pedestal in the center of the circle that I was certain hadn't been there moments before. It lay open to the final pages, pages I hadn't seen before, filled with text that writhed and shifted like living things. And if I refuse? Dr. Webb placed a cold hand on my shoulder. The marks will continue to spread until they cover you completely. When that happens, you'll become a doorway yourself. Not for knowledge to pass through, but for something else. Something ombre. The choice was no choice at all. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me to the center of the circle. The 7 society members took positions at key points around the perimeter, each standing on a specific symbol. Dr. Webb joined them, leaving an 8th position empty, waiting for me. The book's pages fluttered without wind as I approached. The text stabilized, resolving into clear, readable script. My grandmother's handwriting filled the margins, notes and corrections and warnings. One phrase, underlined 3 times, knowledge demands sacrifice. As I touched the book, the black lines on my skin flared with pain. The whispering voices returned, but now they came from the 7 people surrounding me, their lips moving in perfect synchronization as they chanted words in that ancient hybrid language. The air in the center of the circle began to shimmer and distort. The floor beneath my feet seemed to recede, creating the sensation of standing on the edge of an immense precipice. Beyond that edge lay something vast and dark and aware. I began to read from the final pages, the words flowing from my mouth as if I'd known them all my life. With each syllable, the shimmering intensified. The whispering rose to a crescendo. The black lines on my skin burned like fire. Images flooded my mind, stars viewed from impossible angles. Vast cities built of non-Euclidean geometry. Entities moving between dimensions as easily as we move between rooms. Knowledge. So much knowledge. And hunger. An immense, immeasurable hunger that had waited centuries for this moment. The realization hit me with terrible clarity. This wasn't just about knowledge. The Blackridge Antiquarian Society hadn't discovered these texts, they had been given them. Guided. Manipulated. Prepared. We weren't opening a door to reach what lay beyond. We were opening a door to let it reach us. I faltered, the words catching in my throat. The shimmering air pulsed angrily. The 7 figures leaned forward, their chanting growing more insistent. Continue, Dr. Webb commanded. You're almost finished. But my grandmother's warning echoed in my mind, knowledge demands sacrifice. What sacrifice were we making? What were we trading for this glimpse beyond the veil? I looked down at the book again, focusing now on my grandmother's marginalia. Between her cryptic notes were symbols I hadn't noticed before, symbols that contradicted and negated the ones in the main text. She hadn't been completing the translation. She'd been subtly altering it, changing words and phrases to redirect its purpose. She'd been trying to close the door permanently, not open it. The black lines on my skin seemed to sense my hesitation. They constricted painfully, forcing my mouth to form the next words of the ritual. But instead of continuing the original text, I began reciting my grandmother's alterations. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The shimmering air solidified into something almost tangible, a membrane between realities that bulged inward as if under immense pressure from the other side. The 7 society members stiffened, their chanting faltering as they realized what I was doing. Stop him, the bearded man shouted, his voice distorted and inhuman. They rushed toward me, but the circle of symbols flared with blue fire, holding them at bay. The ground beneath us trembled. Books flew from shelves, pages tearing free and swirling in a maelstrom around the circle. I continued reciting my grandmother's words, each syllable causing the membrane to thicken and contract. Through it, I could see something enormous shifting, raging against the closing doorway. Many-limbed and many-eyed, its dimensions impossible for my mind to fully comprehend. The black lines on my skin began to fade, retreating toward my hands. The society members howled in unison, a sound no human throat should produce. Their skin rippled and stretched as if something inside them was trying to break free. You don't understand what you're rejecting. Dr. Webb screamed, her face contorting. The knowledge. The power. Knowledge demands sacrifice, I replied, speaking my grandmother's words. But not this sacrifice. Not our world. With the final phrase, the membrane collapsed inward, then vanished with a thunderclap of imploding air. The blue fire died. The maelstrom of pages fell like snow around us. The 7 society members stood frozen, their bodies rigid. Then, as if strings had been cut, they collapsed to the floor. Not unconscious, empty. Their eyes stared blankly upward, their mouths still open in silent howls. Only Dr. Webb remained standing, her expression a mixture of fury and despair. Do you realize what you've done? She whispered. They were already here, parts of them, inside us. Guiding us. Now we're alone in our bodies again. Empty. I looked at the fallen figures. They were possessed. Enlightened, she corrected. For generations. Since the society first found the texts. We were the caretakers of something greater than ourselves. Her voice broke. And now they're gone. The black lines had vanished completely from my skin, leaving only a single mark on my palm, a small spiral, like the one on the book's cover. Not gone, I said, understanding flowing through me from that final connection. Just contained. where they belong, watching from across the void instead of standing among us. Dr. Webb laughed bitterly. You sound like her. Eliza said the same thing before she tried to burn the books. But you can't destroy knowledge once it's been discovered, Mr. Mercer. It finds new vessels. She looked at me meaningfully. New bloodlines. Around us, the basement had returned to normal, just an old library storage room with outdated filing cabinets and dusty bookshelves. The pedestal had vanished. The red book lay at my feet, closed and seemingly harmless. But as I bent to pick it up, I heard them again, the whispers. Quieter now, more distant. Waiting. What happens now? I asked. Dr. Webb straightened her blouse with trembling hands, a mask of professional composure falling over her like a shield. Now, we clean up this mess. The university will want an explanation for. She gestured at the fallen figures, this. And the books? She looked at me with eyes that were entirely human now, filled with ordinary fear and exhaustion. They're your responsibility now, Mr. Mercer. Just as they were your grandmother's. The society is gone, but the knowledge remains. And it will always need a keeper. As I gathered the volumes into my bag, I felt the weight of inheritance settling over me, not just books, but purpose. My grandmother had spent her life containing what others had sought to release. Now that task fell to me. Outside, the day had progressed to late afternoon, though it felt as if weeks had passed in the basement. The sun cast long shadows across the university grounds, normal shadows that didn't move independently or whisper secrets. But as I walked away from Blackridge Library, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from across an immeasurable distance. And in the quiet moments between thoughts, I could still hear them, voices speaking from beyond the veil, promising knowledge in exchange for sacrifice. Knowledge I now carried in my bag. Knowledge that would always hunger for release. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at Blackridge Library. 2 weeks of sleepless nights and whispered voices that followed me from city to city as I searched for answers. The books never left my possession, a heavy leather satchel that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. I'd taken a leave of absence from my restoration work, citing personal reasons. My colleagues were concerned but not surprised. After all, I'd been working nonstop since my divorce. A breakdown was overdue. If only it were that simple. I sat in my apartment in Boston, surrounded by research materials, historical records of the Blackridge Antiquarian Society, genealogical charts tracing my grandmother's lineage, and photographs of similar symbols found in archaeological sites around the world. The red book lay open before me, its pages now appearing ordinary under the harsh light of my desk lamp. But I knew better. At night, when the shadows lengthened, the text would begin to shift again. The whispers would return, more insistent than before. My phone rang, the fourth call today from Dr. Webb. I'd been ignoring her since leaving Blackridge, but her persistence was becoming harder to dismiss. Finally, I answered. Mr. Mercer, her voice sounded strained, desperate. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. The words came out harsher than intended. People are dying, Thomas. The use of my first name caught me off guard. Dr. Webb had always maintained a cool professionalism, even during the ritual. What are you talking about? The other members of the society. They didn't just collapse. They're changing. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Pierce died yesterday, the older gentleman with the white beard. His body, the medical examiner said his internal organs had rearranged themselves. as if something had been moving inside him. My mouth went dry. That's not possible. The others are showing similar symptoms. Professor Whitaker's skin has begun to harden like shell. Dean Collins developed additional eyelids. Her voice broke. I've been experiencing changes too. My dreams. I can't tell where they end anymore. I glanced down at my palm where the spiral mark remained, dark against my skin. It hadn't spread or changed, but sometimes it seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. What do you want from me? You closed the door, but something still came through. She paused. Or maybe something was left behind. We need your help. My help? I laughed bitterly. You used me as a key to unlock something monstrous. Now you want my help? Your grandmother knew how to control it, Dr. Webb insisted. She maintained the barrier for decades without incident. There must be more in her notes, in her research. Something that could help us contain what's happening. I looked at the genealogical charts spread across my desk. My grandmother's line traced back to the founding of Blackridge Town in the early 1800s. Every generation had at least one member who joined the Antiquarian Society. Until my mother, who'd fled as a teenager and never spoken of her childhood. I'll think about it, I said finally, hanging up before she could respond. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother's house, a Victorian structure on the outskirts of Blackridge that had been sold after her death. In the dream, I walked through rooms I barely remembered, eventually descending into a cellar I'd never seen in waking life. The walls were lined with bookshelves identical to those in the library basement. At the center stood a pedestal holding not a book but a small wooden box carved with the now familiar spiral symbol. My dream self opened the box, revealing a key made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. I knew, with dream logic certainty, that this key opened a door that should remain closed. I awoke with a gasp, my hand clutching at empty air. The room was dark except for a faint glow coming from my desk, the red book, its pages emitting a subtle luminescence visible only in complete darkness. As I watched, words appeared on the wall beside my bed, written in shadows darker than the surrounding night. The key lies where it was hidden. The door waits for its keeper. By morning, the words had vanished, but their message remained burned into my mind. I packed a small bag, including the books, and booked a flight back to Blackridge. Dr. Webb met me at the airport, her appearance shocking after just 2 weeks. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her eyes had darkened to solid black, with no distinction between iris and pupil. She wore large sunglasses and a scarf wrapped high around her neck despite the warm day. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice raspier than I remembered. "I'm not doing this for you," I replied. "I need to see my grandmother's house." She nodded. "It's been empty since the last owners moved out. They claimed to hear voices in the walls." The drive through Blackridge was surreal, a picturesque New England town preparing for summer, oblivious to the horror unfolding within its university. Students lounged on the commons, tourists photographed historic buildings, and locals went about their business under clear blue skies. Yet as we drove toward the outskirts of town, I noticed subtle wrongness in the landscape. Trees that bent at unnatural angles, as if growing away from certain areas. Birds that circled but never landed. And shadows that seemed too deep, too solid for the bright afternoon. My grandmother's house stood on a hill overlooking the town, a 3-story Victorian with a widow's walk-in wraparound porch. The white paint had yellowed and peeled, the garden overgrown with weeds and strange flowering plants I couldn't identify. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The university maintains ownership, Dr. Webb explained as we approached. Part of your grandmother's arrangement with the society. No one has lived here permanently since she died. I paused at the foot of the porch steps, suddenly hesitant. The house seemed to loom larger than its physical dimensions, as if it contained more space inside than should be possible. The windows reflected nothing, appearing as black voids against the weathered exterior. The others wanted to come, Dr. Webb said, removing her sunglasses briefly. Her black eyes blinked, a sideways motion like a reptile's. I thought it better they didn't. How many are left? 5, including myself. Pierce was the first to transform completely. I didn't ask for details. Instead, I climbed the steps, the wood creaking beneath my weight. The front door was locked, but as I touched the knob, the spiral mark on my palm grew warm. The lock clicked open of its own accord. The interior was frozen in time, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, wallpaper faded but intact, floorboards polished to a dull shine by decades of footsteps. The air smelled of dust and the same copper herb scent from the books. She never changed anything after joining the society, Dr. Webb said, hovering near the entrance as if afraid to venture deeper. This house has remained exactly the same for over a century. I moved through the first floor, memories surfacing with each room. The parlor where my grandmother would serve tea in delicate cups. The study where she'd write for hours in leather-bound journals. The kitchen with its ancient stove and herb bundles hanging from the ceiling. But my dream had shown me a cellar, and I needed to find the entrance. I recalled no basement from my childhood visits, but those memories were fragmentary at best. In the pantry, I found what I was looking for, a door hidden behind shelves of preserved goods, visible only because one jar had fallen and rolled aside. The spiral mark on my palm pulsed as I approached, and without thinking, I pressed my hand against the wood. The door swung inward, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "Wait," Dr. Webb called from the kitchen doorway. "You don't know what's down there." But I did know. My dream had shown me truth, not fantasy. I withdrew a flashlight from my bag and began to descend, ignoring her protests. The stairs continued far deeper than the house's foundation should have allowed, curving slightly as they went. The walls were rough-hewn stone that glistened with moisture, yet felt completely dry to the touch. As I descended, the copper herb smell grew stronger, mingling now with something else, the metallic tang of old blood. The cellar, when I finally reached it, matched my dream exactly, circular walls lined with bookshelves, a stone pedestal at the center. But instead of a wooden box, the pedestal held a leather-bound journal identical to the one I'd found in the library basement. I approached slowly, the flashlight beam revealing my grandmother's elegant handwriting on the open pages. The journal was dated June 17, 1938, decades before my birth. "My dearest grandson," the entry began. "If you are reading this, then the burden has passed to you as I always feared it would. The society has found you, used you, just as they once used me. And now you must understand what they did not, what they refused to see." My hands trembled as I turned the pages, reading my grandmother's account of her induction into the society as a young woman, her initial excitement at the knowledge they offered, and her growing horror as she realized their true purpose. "They believe they control the door," she wrote. "That they can open and close it at will, extracting knowledge while keeping the entities at bay. But the door works both ways. Each time it opens, something comes through, something that needs a human vessel. The society members are not controllers of ancient powers. They are hosts for fragments of beings that exist beyond our comprehension." I thought of Dr. Webb's black eyes and the changes she described in the others. not a result of the ritual's interruption, but the natural progression of a process that had been ongoing for generations. I found a way to contain them, my grandmother continued. Not to banish them entirely, that power is beyond any human, but to keep them dormant within their hosts. The key is in the blood. Our bloodline carries a natural resistance, which is why they need us to complete the rituals. What they don't know is that same resistance allows us to create boundaries they cannot cross. The final pages detail the counter ritual, similar to what I'd instinctively performed at the library, but more complete. And at the center of the pedestal, beneath the journal, lay what I had seen in my dream, a small wooden box carved with the spiral symbol. As I reached for it, a voice spoke from the stairs behind me. "Don't touch that." Dr. Webb stood halfway down the steps, her posture unnaturally rigid. She had removed her sunglasses and scarf, revealing skin that had begun to mottle with gray-green patches. Her neck pulsed with movement beneath the surface, as if something were shifting position. "You've gone far enough, Thomas," she said, her voice overlaid now with another, deeper, resonant, and distinctly inhuman. "Eliza tried to contain us. She temporarily succeeded, but such barriers are always temporary. The knowledge will be free. You're not Eleanor Webb anymore, are you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. A smile stretched her face too wide for human anatomy. "Webb has been our vessel for 23 years. A willing one until recently. But her usefulness, like her resistance, is fading." Her body moved down the remaining steps with jerking, marionette motions. "The society has served its purpose." The door was opened. "Now we prepare for what comes next." "And what is that?" I asked, slowly circling the pedestal to maintain distance between us. "Convergence. Your world and ours, joined as they were meant to be. Knowledge without boundaries." Her head tilted at an impossible angle. "The books were just the beginning, a primer for human minds. The true library exists elsewhere. My grandmother's journal had described this, the entity's ultimate goal. Not just possession or influence, but fundamental transformation of our reality to match theirs. A blending that would destroy everything human about our world. And you need me to complete it," I said. "My bloodline. Not just your blood." The thing wearing Dr. Webb's body pointed to the mark on my palm. "You are already carrying part of us. The seed was planted when you read from the book. It grows even now." I looked at my hand, seeing how the spiral had indeed expanded slightly, thin tendrils extending toward my fingers. Cold fear washed through me. That's why the whispers have followed me. Why I can understand the text. Yes. You are becoming a bridge, a perfect vessel unlike these flawed hosts. Her smile widened further, splitting her cheeks with hairline fractures. You will be our voice. Our hand in this world. I lunged for the wooden box, snatching it from beneath the journal. Dr. Webb, or the thing controlling her, shrieked with multiple voices and launched herself across the room with inhuman speed. I barely had time to open the box before she was upon me, her hands transformed into claw-like appendages that tore at my clothes and skin. Inside the box lay the key from my dream, a twisted piece of dark metal that seemed to absorb the flashlight's beam. As her weight bore me to the ground, I clutched the key tightly. The spiral mark burned like fire, spreading faster now, black lines racing up my arm just as they had during the ritual. You cannot resist what you're becoming, the voices hissed through Dr. Webb's distorted mouth. The transformation has already begun. But my grandmother's journal had explained what I needed to do. The key wasn't for any physical door, It was a metaphorical key, a focus object for the counter-ritual. And the most important component was already in my blood. I began reciting the words my grandmother had written, ancient syllables that felt like fire in my throat. Dr. Webb's body convulsed atop me, her skin rippling as the thing inside fought to maintain control. Stop! The voices rose to a screech. You'll destroy everything, including yourself. The black lines had reached my shoulder now, burning like acid beneath my skin. But as I continued the incantation, clutching the key between us, something changed. The lines began to flow outward, not into me, but from me into the key, which grew hot in my grasp. Dr. Webb's body arched backward, mouth open in a silent scream as dark tendrils began to emerge from her eyes, nose, and mouth, flowing like liquid shadow toward the key. The air in the cellar grew thick and charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The bookshelves rattled, volumes tumbling to the floor. Dust and debris swirled around us in a miniature cyclone as the counter-ritual reached its climax. With a sound like reality tearing, the shadows ripped free from Dr. Webb's body, coalescing around the key in my hand. Her now empty form collapsed beside me, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The key had transformed, growing larger and more complex, no longer just metal but something between matter and energy, with the captured essence of the entity swirling within its structure like galaxies seen through darkened glass. I staggered to my feet, the weight of the key nearly dragging my arm to the floor. According to my grandmother's journal, it needed to be placed in the center of the ritual circle, completing the containment that she had maintained for decades before her death. As if responding to my thoughts, a section of the floor at the center of the room began to shift, stones rearranging themselves to reveal a circular depression lined with familiar symbols. I placed the key in its center, reciting the final words of my grandmother's counter-ritual. The key sank into the floor, the stone flowing around it like water before hardening again. The symbols glowed briefly blue, then faded to a dull luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. Silence fell over the cellar. The spiral mark on my palm had stopped spreading but remained, a permanent reminder of how close I'd come to transformation. Dr. Webb groaned softly, her eyes fluttering open, normal human eyes again, filled with confusion and pain. What happened? She whispered, her voice her own once more. I helped her to a sitting position, noting how her skin had returned to its natural color, the mottled patches fading like bruises. It's contained, I said. For now. Contained, not destroyed, she murmured, understanding dawning in her expression. Just as your grandmother did. I nodded, looking at the floor where the key had disappeared. It can't be destroyed, not completely. Knowledge once discovered can't be erased. It can only be guarded. And that's your role now, she said. The guardian. The realization settled over me like a weight, the understanding that I couldn't simply walk away from this. My grandmother had spent her life maintaining the barrier between worlds. Now that responsibility had fallen to me. What about the others? I asked. The remaining society members? Dr. Webb's expression darkened. I don't know if they can be saved. The process was further along for them. They'd been hosts longer. I helped her to her feet, and together we ascended the stairs, leaving the cellar and its secrets behind, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. Outside, the day had faded to dusk, shadows stretching across the overgrown garden. But they were just ordinary shadows now, cast by solid objects in the fading light. The whispers had gone silent. The books in my bag felt lighter, their power diminished though not eliminated. They would always be dangerous, windows to knowledge that humans weren't meant to possess. As we walked toward the car, Dr. Webb asked the question I've been dreading. What happens now? I looked back at my grandmother's house. My house now, I realized. The next keeper of the key would need to live here, close to the containment site. Now we find the others, I said. And I learned how to be what my grandmother was. And what was that? The spiral mark on my palm pulsed once, as if in answer. A librarian, I replied. Of the most dangerous library in the world. 1 year later, I stood in the renovated cellar of my grandmother's house, now my house, surveying the changes I'd made. The bookshelves remained, but they now formed a perfect circle around the central depression where the key lay sealed beneath stone. New electric lights had been installed, banishing the shadows that had once dominated the space. The books, all 23 volumes we'd ultimately discovered, sat secured behind glass cases, their spines facing inward rather than outward. A precaution I'd learned from my grandmother's journals. The words wanted to be read, the knowledge sought to spread. Even a glimpse of a title could plant seeds in susceptible minds. Dr. Webb, Eleanor, as I now called her, descended the stairs behind me, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. Her recovery had been remarkable once freed from her unwelcome passenger. The other society members hadn't been so fortunate. Of the 5 remaining, only 2 had survived the extraction. The others had been too thoroughly transformed, their human essence too diluted by what had taken residence within them. Professor Whitaker is here, she said, placing the tray on a small table we'd set up for our weekly meetings. He has news from the European branch. I nodded, taking a cup. Send him down. In the year since we contained the entities, we discovered that the Blackridge Antiquarian Society hadn't been an isolated group. Similar organizations existed throughout the world, each guarding or exploiting fragments of knowledge from beyond. Some had been corrupted as Blackridge had been. Others maintained their original purpose as guardians against intrusion. Professor Whitaker's footsteps echoed on the stairs. Like Eleanor, he'd recovered from his partial transformation, though he still wore gloves to cover the chitinous patches that occasionally appeared on his hands during times of stress. Thomas, he greeted me with a nod, accepting the cup Eleanor offered. The Vienna group reports increased activity. 3 of their members have gone missing in the past month. I frowned. The same pattern as Prague. And Kyoto before that, Eleanor added. It's spreading. We had been tracking a new phenomenon, society members disappearing across the globe, leaving behind journals filled with fragments of the same text I nearly completed in the Blackridge ritual. Someone, or something, was attempting to reconstruct the knowledge we contained. They're trying a different approach, I said, placing my cup down and walking to one of the glass cases. Inside lay the red leather book, the first I'd found, the one that had started everything. Not one door, but many. Small breaches rather than a single gateway. The spiral mark on my palm tingled, as it always did in proximity to the books. Not painful anymore, but a constant reminder of my connection to what lay beyond. I'd learned to use it as a detection system, sensing disturbances in the barrier we maintained. We need to consolidate the remaining texts, Professor Whitaker suggested. Bring them all here, under your protection. Eleanor shook her head. Too dangerous. If something happened here, all would be lost. I agree, I said. Better to maintain separate containment sites, with communication between guardians. I turned to face them. But we do need better coordination. The old society structure was vulnerable to corruption precisely because of its hierarchy and secrecy. The new network we established was more democratic, more transparent, guardians from around the world sharing information and techniques while maintaining independent containment protocols. My grandmother would have approved, I thought. A soft chime sounded from the monitoring equipment we'd installed around the sealed key. I moved quickly to the display, checking the readings. Fluctuation in the barrier, I reported. Minor, but the third this week. Eleanor joined me, her expression concerned. They're getting stronger. Testing the boundaries. I placed my marked palm over the central stone, feeling the familiar resonance between my blood and what lay sealed beneath. The connection had grown stronger over the past year as I'd studied my grandmother's techniques and developed my own. It's holding, I said after a moment. But you're right, something's changed. They're becoming more active. A theory had been forming in my mind for weeks, one I hesitated to share. But now it seemed unavoidable. I don't think they're trying to break through anymore, I said slowly. At least, not directly. They've learned from their failures. What do you mean? Professor Whitaker asked. I returned to the table, opening my own journal, a habit I'd adopted from my grandmother. The pattern of disappearances, the fragmentary texts, they're not trying to open a door. They're trying to create a map. Eleanor's eyes widened with understanding. A map to what? To here. To all the containment sites. I tapped the floor where the key lay hidden. They can't break the barriers from their side, but if they could guide someone to destroy them from ours. The implications hung in the air between us. We had focused so much on preventing incursion that we'd overlooked the possibility of targeted attack. We need to warn the others, Professor Whitaker said, already reaching for his phone. Not by electronic means, I cautioned. We don't know how they might be monitoring. Use the old methods. The secure channels my grandmother established. As they hurried upstairs to send messages through our network of trusted couriers, I remained in the cellar, my thoughts turning to the dreams that had become increasingly frequent, dreams of a vast library unlike any on Earth, with shelves that extended in impossible directions and books written in languages that changed as you read them. The library they had promised. The knowledge they had offered. I approached the glass case containing the red book, placing my marked palm against the cool surface. Through our connection, I had glimpsed what they truly were, not evil in any human sense, but utterly alien. Their concept of knowledge was inseparable from transformation. To learn was to become. To understand was to change. They couldn't comprehend why we would resist. And part of me, the part marked by the spiral, sometimes wondered if resistance was the right choice. A whisper brushed against my mind, so faint I might have imagined it. But I recognized the voice, the same that had spoken through Dr. Webb in the cellar a year ago. Guardian, it said. Keeper. Listen. I closed my eyes, not fighting the connection but not surrendering to it either. My grandmother's journals had taught me to balance on this knife edge, aware but not receptive, connected but not controlled. I'm listening, I replied silently. War comes, the whisper continued. Not of our making. Others seek what we offered freely. They will not ask. They will take. A chill ran through me. What others? Instead of words, an image formed in my mind, a darkness different from the swirling cosmos I associated with the entities we contained. This was an absence, a void that consumed rather than transformed. Knowledge not as evolution but as weapon. You need our help, I realized. That's why the barriers are fluctuating. You're not trying to break through. You're trying to strengthen them. Yes, the whisper confirmed, the words stretching like smoke. The library must be protected. From them. From all who would burn rather than read. The spiral mark burned as the connection deepened, showing me glimpses of what approached, entities even the book beings feared, drawn by the concentrated knowledge contained in the sealed texts. Hunters of information who destroyed what they couldn't control. I severed the connection with effort, stumbling back from the glass case. My heart raced as I processed what I'd learned. If what they showed me was true, our careful network of containment sites might soon become targets in a conflict beyond human understanding. Footsteps on the stairs announced Eleanor's return. Messages sent, she reported. Then, seeing my expression, what happened? We have a problem, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A new problem. I explained what I'd seen, what I'd been told. Eleanor listened without interruption, her face growing graver with each detail. Could it be a deception? She asked when I finished. A trick to make us lower the barriers? Possible, I admitted. But my grandmother's journals mentioned something similar, periods when the entities seemed to retreat, strengthening the barriers from their side rather than weakening them. Cycles of aggression and cooperation? Professor Whitaker suggested, having joined us partway through my explanation. More like mutual self-interest, I said. They want access to our world, yes, but not at the cost of its destruction or transformation by something else. We fell silent, contemplating the implications. If true, we faced an impossible choice: maintain our containment protocols and risk attack from this new threat, or work with the entities we've been guarding against to create stronger defenses. Your grandmother must have faced this situation, Eleanor said finally. What did she choose? I moved to a small safe embedded in the wall, opening it with a combination I'd found in the journals. Inside lay a single folded page, the last my grandmother had written before her death, sealed separately from her other writings. I discovered it months ago but had been hesitant to share its contents. Now the time had come. She chose a third option, I said, unfolding the yellow paper. Listen. To my successor, when the cycle returns and they seek alliance against the void, remember this: they cannot lie through the blood connection, but neither do they understand truth as we do. Their help comes with transformation. Their protection requires symbiosis. I chose partial integration rather than full resistance or complete surrender. The spiral mark is not just connection but containment, a controlled channel. Through it, you can access what is needed without losing yourself entirely. This is the true purpose of our bloodline, not to open doors or seal them permanently, but to become the door itself. A door that opens only as wide as we choose. I looked up from the page, meeting their shocked expressions. She allowed them partial access, Eleanor whispered. Controlled integration. I nodded, rolling up my sleeve to reveal what I kept hidden for months. The spiral mark had indeed spread, but not randomly. It had formed intricate patterns up my arm, symbols and script that matched those in the books but arranged in configurations of my own design. Conscious direction rather than passive infection. I've been experimenting, I confessed. Learning to channel the connection, to draw knowledge without surrendering control. It's how I knew something had changed. I felt their concern, their fear, if that's even the right word for what they experience. Professor Whitaker approached, examining the markings with scholarly interest. You've become a conduit. A regulated one, I corrected. The flow goes both ways, but I control the valve. Eleanor's expression shifted from shock to thoughtful consideration. If what they've shown you is true, we need to alert all containment sites immediately. And reconsider our strategies. Not just alert them, I said, my resolve hardening as the pieces fell into place. We need to prepare them. Each guardian will need to learn what I've discovered, how to transform their marks from vulnerabilities into tools. I looked at the floor where the key lay sealed, feeling the pulse of what it contained, knowledge waiting to be channeled, power that could be directed rather than merely contained. My grandmother understood that perfect containment was impossible, I continued. Knowledge always finds a way to spread. But she also knew that uncontrolled release would be catastrophic. So she created a third path, controlled integration. Symbiosis with boundaries. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the high cellar windows. But these shadows no longer filled me with dread. They were simply absence of light, not presence of something else. The true presences, both the entities we contained and those now approaching, existed beyond such simple manifestations. We have work to do, I said, closing my grandmother's final message and returning it to the safe. A network to rebuild, guardians to train, and defenses to strengthen. As Eleanor and Professor Whitaker nodded their agreement, I felt the weight of inheritance settle more firmly on my shoulders. My grandmother had been more than a librarian, she had been a gatekeeper, a negotiator between worlds. Now that role had passed to me, and with it, challenges she could only prepare me for, not shield me from. The spiral mark on my palm pulsed with potential, danger, and opportunity intertwined. Knowledge always came with a price. The trick, as my grandmother had learned, was negotiating that price from a position of strength. I placed my hand against the central stone once more, feeling the key beneath, the boundary between worlds. Not a wall but a membrane, selectively permeable under the right conditions. We begin tonight, I said, channeling a controlled flow of energy into the barrier, strengthening it against what approached from beyond. The Blackridge Antiquarian Society has a new purpose. The whispers returned briefly, a chorus of alien voices speaking in unison through our tenuous connection. The shadows deepen. The forgotten return. The library awaits its readers. I answered with my own thought, broadcasting it through the channel I now controlled. On our terms. At our pace. With our humanity intact. The spiral flared once with blue fire, then settled into a steady glow, an agreement reached, a contract sealed. Not with blood or ritual, but with understanding. The true power, I realized, had never been in the books themselves, but in the choice of how to read them. And now was a power entirely human, the power to learn without becoming lost in the knowledge, to change without surrendering identity. As night fell completely outside, I activated the new containment protocols we designed, enclosing the cellar in layers of protection both technological and mystical. The books sat silent behind their glass, waiting. The key remained sealed beneath stone, connecting worlds without merging them. And I, Thomas Mercer, grandson of Eliza, stood at the threshold between knowledge and chaos, not just guardian of forbidden texts, but translator of worlds that never should have met but now could never be fully separated. The shadows had taught me their language. I had taught them my boundaries. In the space between, we would face whatever came from the void beyond. Together, but not as one. Do you believe a house can remember? The old Blackwell house had stood on Willow Street for over a century, surviving storms, neglect, and generations of families who came and went like seasons. I never thought I'd be the one to uncover its darkest secret. My name is Eleanor Wright, and 3 months ago, I moved into this house after my divorce. At 42, starting over wasn't what I had planned, but the surprisingly affordable Victorian charmer in this small town seemed like fate. With its weathered brick exterior, wraparound porch with peeling white paint, and arched windows that caught the light just so. It felt like a refuge. A place to heal. The real estate agent had been oddly vague about the previous owners. Family issues, she'd said with a tight smile. They needed to sell quickly. In retrospect, I should have asked more questions. But the price was right, and I was desperate for a fresh start far from Thomas and his new, younger girlfriend. The first month passed peacefully as I established my remote work routine as a technical writer and explored the small town of Millhaven. I found comfort in the house's quirks, the way the third step on the staircase always creaked no matter how carefully I trod, the temperamental radiators that clanked and hissed like living things, the way the wind sometimes played through the chimney flue, creating melodic whispers. It wasn't until the autumn rains began that I first heard it. I was making tea late one night when a thunderstorm knocked out the power. In the sudden silence, no humming refrigerator, no subtle electronic buzz from the microwave, I heard something else beneath the drumming of rain on the roof. A soft, muffled sobbing. I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. The sound was coming from below. From the cellar. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish immediately. I lived alone. There was no one else in the house. The crying stopped abruptly. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, or perhaps water in the pipes. Old houses made strange noises, everyone knew that. I finished my tea by candlelight and went to bed, pushing the incident from my mind. But 3 nights later, as I worked late at my computer, I heard it again. This time, the crying was accompanied by words too distant to make out, but distinctly a young girl's voice. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. The sound was definitely coming from the cellar, a part of the house I'd avoided since moving in. The narrow wooden door under the staircase led to stone steps descending into what the previous owners had used as storage. I'd glanced down there once during the home tour, noting the dirt floor, stone walls, and single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Stop it, Eleanor," I muttered to myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But as the crying continued, something primal overrode my rational mind. I found myself walking to the kitchen to retrieve a flashlight from the drawer. I needed to know. The cellar door creaked open on rusty hinges. The wooden steps looked precarious in the flashlight beam, narrowing as they disappeared into darkness. The musty smell of earth and mildew wafted up to meet me. As I took the first step down, my flashlight flickered. The crying stopped again. Is someone there?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid. Silence answered me, but in that silence was a weight and awareness. I could feel someone, something, listening. I continued down one step at a time, the old wood groaning beneath my weight. The temperature dropped with each step, until my breath formed small clouds in front of my face. The cellar was larger than I remembered. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cobwebs, abandoned shelving units, and an old trunk pushed against the far wall. Nothing unusual. Nothing that could explain the crying. I was about to turn back when my light caught something on the dirt floor, a small impression, almost like a footprint. A child's footprint. My heart stuttered. It looked fresh, the edges clearly defined in the loose soil. I swung my flashlight around wildly, searching every corner of the cellar. "Hello? Is there a child down here? Are you hurt?" A light breeze brushed against my cheek, impossible in this enclosed space with no windows. With it came a whisper, so close it could have been someone standing right behind me. "Help me. I whirled around, but there was no one there. My flashlight beam caught something else, scratch marks on the stone wall, as if someone had clawed desperately at the unyielding surface. The bare bulb hanging from the ceiling suddenly flickered to life, though I hadn't touched the switch. In its harsh light, I saw more footprints crisscrossing the dirt floor, appearing as I watched, one after another, in a circular pattern around me. My flashlight died. The cellar bulb buzzed, grew brighter, then exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. Complete darkness engulfed me. And in that darkness, I felt small, cold fingers brush against my hand. I screamed and stumbled backward, falling against the wooden steps. Scrambling upward on hands and knees, I burst through the cellar door and slammed it shut behind me, heart pounding wildly against my ribs. I spent the rest of that night huddled on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When morning came, I convinced myself I'd imagined it all, stress, an overactive imagination, perhaps even a half-dream. After all, I'd been working too hard, sleeping too little. But when I finally gathered the courage to check my hand in the bright morning light, I found 5 tiny bruises forming on my wrist, like fingerprints. And from behind the locked cellar door came the faint sound of a child's laughter. What if the walls of your home contained memories that didn't belong to you? After the incident in the cellar, I spent days researching the history of the house, determined to find a rational explanation. The local library held archives of town newspapers dating back to the 19th century. The librarian, a silver-haired woman named Dorothy, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned my address. "The old Blackwell place," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Interesting choice." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly alert. Dorothy hesitated. "Nothing really. Just, there have been stories about that house. Probably nothing to worry about." I leaned closer. "What kind of stories?" She sighed and led me to a back room filled with microfiche readers and bound volumes of yellow newspapers. I shouldn't encourage this, but... She pulled out a dusty ledger. "This contains property records. And this," she gestured to a filing cabinet, "has newspaper clippings about significant local events. The house on Willow Street appears a few times." I thanked her and settled in for hours of research. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The house had been built in 1887 by merchant Joseph Blackwell for his wife and 3 children. All seemed well until 1893, when their youngest daughter, Lily, age 8, mysteriously vanished. According to the newspaper accounts, she was last seen playing in the yard. Despite extensive searches, she was never found. A year later, Joseph's wife, Adelaide, committed suicide. The article delicately referred to her melancholia and persistent claims of hearing her lost daughter's cries from beneath the house. The Blackwell family abandoned the home shortly after. Since then, the house had changed hands over 20 times, an unusually high turnover. Several families had left abruptly, breaking leases or selling at losses. In 1972, a renovation uncovered a small shoe behind a wall, a child's button boot, preserved like a macabre time capsule. The article included a grainy photograph, and I recognized the style immediately. It was from the late 19th century. I returned home with a heavy feeling in my chest. The house seemed to watch me as I approached, its windows like dark, knowing eyes. Inside, everything looked normal, but now felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more expectant. That night, I dreamed of a little girl in a white dress with a blue sash. She stood at the foot of my bed, her face in shadow. "They won't let me leave," she said. I woke with a start, heart racing to find my bedroom door open, but I distinctly remembered closing it before bed. From downstairs came the sound of light, running footsteps. Over the next few days, strange incidents multiplied. Doors I'd closed would be open when I returned. Items disappeared, my car keys, reading glasses, a favorite coffee mug, only to reappear in odd places like inside the refrigerator or balanced atop the curtain rod. The temperature fluctuated wildly in certain rooms. Cold spots appeared and disappeared, sometimes accompanied by that same faint scent I noticed in the cellar, a peculiar combination of damp earth and something floral, like lilies. I began to hear humming, a childish, repetitive tune, always just at the edge of hearing. It followed me from room to room. When I tried to record it on my phone, the file contained only static. During video calls for work, colleagues commented on the little girl they sometimes glimpsed behind me. "I didn't know you had a daughter," one said. I lived alone. I kept the cellar door locked and avoided passing it. Sometimes at night, I heard scratching from the other side, as if small fingernails were dragging across the wood. Sleep became elusive. I would drift off only to be startled awake by the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. Once, I felt small fingers combing through my hair. On the 7th night after my discovery at the library, I jolted awake at 3 a.m., the witching hour, to find all the faucets in the house running at full blast. The bathroom mirror was covered in small, childish handprints that disappeared when I tried to touch them. Written in the condensation were the words, "Find me." The next morning, bleary-eyed and exhausted, I called the only person who might understand. My sister Olivia had always been more open to the unexplainable. She arrived that afternoon with an overnight bag and a skeptical expression that quickly faded as the hours passed. "There's definitely something here," she whispered that evening, after the lights had flickered for the 3rd time during dinner. "Something angry." "Not angry," I corrected, remembering the small, cold fingers on my hand. "Desperate." That night, with Olivia sleeping in the guest room, I woke to the sound of a child's laughter. When I opened my eyes, she was there, the little girl from my dream, standing in the doorway. Her dress was torn and dirty now, her hair in disarray. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, I could finally see her face clearly. Her eyes were hollow sockets filled with darkness. "You have to help me," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "They buried me in the walls." She turned and walked away. Without thinking, I followed. She led me downstairs, her small form flickering like a candle flame, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. She stopped at the cellar door, which swung open on its own. "I can't," I whispered, terror rooting me to the spot. The girl looked back at me, and for a moment, her eyes were normal, blue, filled with tears and pleading. "Please," she said. "I've been alone so long." Something in her voice broke through my fear. This was a child, a lost, frightened child. I followed her down the cellar steps, which no longer creaked. The darkness seemed alive, swirling around us. The girl moved to the far wall, where I had seen the scratch marks. "Here," she said, placing her small palm against the stone. "They put me here." As if in a trance, I approached the wall. In the dim light from my phone's flashlight, I could see that one of the stones protruded slightly. With trembling fingers, I pushed against it. The stone moved. Behind me, I heard Olivia's voice calling my name from upstairs, but it seemed distant, unimportant. I pushed harder. The stone slid back, revealing a dark cavity beyond. The smell that emerged was overwhelming, earth and decay and lilies, so strong it made my eyes water. The little girl flickered beside me, her form growing more solid with each passing second. She smiled, but something was wrong with her smile. It stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice had changed. It was deeper now, layered, as if multiple voices spoke together. "Now you can take my place." Cold, strong hands emerged from the darkness of the cavity, grabbing for my wrists. I stumbled backward with a scream as the girl's image distorted, stretching and twisting into something no longer human. The last thing I saw before Olivia burst into the cellar, wielding a fireplace poker and shouting my name, was the creature's true form, a twisted, ancient thing that had never been a child at all, wearing innocence like an ill-fitting mask. And it was hungry. Have you ever wondered what secrets might hide within the spaces you cannot see? We need to leave. Olivia's voice was firm as she pulled me up the cellar stairs. Now, Eleanor. My mind felt foggy, as if I were emerging from a deep trance. The entity that had posed as a little girl was gone, but its presence lingered in the cellar like a foul miasma. We slammed the door shut and Olivia jammed a chair under the handle. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "I don't know," Olivia admitted, "but it wasn't a ghost. Not just a ghost, anyway. Whatever's in this house, it's been here a long time, and it knows how to manipulate people." We spent that night in a hotel 10 miles away. I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't erase the image of that thing's face as it transformed, how the childlike features had melted and reformed into something ancient and hungry. Sleep evaded me, and when dawn finally arrived, I had made my decision. "I'm going back," I told Olivia over untouched breakfast plates. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "That thing almost." "There's a real girl," I interrupted. "Behind the false one. I've felt her. What we saw last night was something using her image, her tragedy. But Lily Blackwell was real, Olivia. She disappeared in 1893. What if she never left the house?" Olivia stared at me. "Even if you're right, and that's a massive if, what do you think you can do about it? You're not a medium or an exorcist." "No," I agreed. "But I know someone who might help." Dr. Marcus Reed was a professor of parapsychology at the State University. I'd interviewed him once for an article years ago and remembered his card still tucked away in my wallet. He answered on the third ring, and to his credit, didn't immediately hang up when I explained my situation. "Fascinating," he said instead. "The Blackwell house has quite a reputation in certain circles. I'd be happy to take a look." Dr. Reed arrived that afternoon, a tall, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and prematurely gray hair. He carried a duffel bag filled with equipment, EMF meters, thermal cameras, digital recorders. Olivia refused to enter the house again but waited in her car outside, engine running, ready for a quick escape if necessary. "Most hauntings are residual energy," Dr. Reed explained as he set up his equipment in the living room. "Like emotional echoes imprinted on the environment. But occasionally, we encounter something more conscious. Interactive." "It's interactive, all right," I muttered, telling him about the footprints, the writing on the mirror, the moving objects. "Classic poltergeist activity," he nodded. "Though the manifestation as a child is interesting. Entities often choose forms that elicit sympathy or reduced fear." "It worked," I admitted. "I followed it." Dr. Reed's expression grew serious. "That was incredibly dangerous, Ms. Wright. Never follow an entity, no matter how benign it appears." We moved methodically through the house, Dr. Reed taking readings and making notes. The equipment beeped and whirred, registering electromagnetic fluctuations, temperature drops, and other anomalies I didn't understand. The activity peaked near the cellar door. "Remarkable readings," Dr. Reed murmured, studying his instruments. "This location is a nexus of psychokinetic energy. If your research is correct, and little Lily Blackwell disappeared in 1893. "I think she's still here," I said quietly. "In the cellar. In the walls." Dr. Reed looked at me sharply. "What do you mean, in the walls?" I told him about the cavity I discovered, the protruding stone. His expression darkened. "We need to investigate, but carefully. Whatever is down there has been manipulating you, using the image of Lily to gain your trust. It may not be Lily at all. Then what is it?" He hesitated. "There are entities that feed on emotional energy. Grief, fear, confusion, these are powerful emotional states. If something happened to Lily in this house, and her parents' grief was intense enough, it could have attracted something," I finished, feeling ill. "Yes. And it may have been here ever since, feeding on the fear and distress of subsequent inhabitants. The frequent turnover of owners suggests many have sensed something wrong." Together, we approached the cellar door. The chair still wedged under the handle had moved slightly, as if something, had been trying to push it open from the other side. Dr. Reed removed the chair and the door immediately swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying that now familiar scent of earth and lilies. "I'll go first," Dr. Reed said, switching on a powerful flashlight. "Stay close, but if I tell you to run, don't hesitate." The cellar seemed different in daylight, smaller, more ordinary. Dr. Reed's instruments beeped frantically as we moved toward the far wall where I'd seen the protruding stone. "Extraordinary," he breathed, examining the readings. "The energy here is off the charts." I pointed to the stone. "That's it. That's where it tried to grab me." Dr. Reed approached cautiously, running his fingers along the edges of the stone. "This isn't original to the foundation," he observed. "This section was added later, perhaps as a repair." He pressed against the stone, and like before, it moved slightly. But instead of continuing, he stepped back and retrieved a small chisel and hammer from his bag. "If something is concealed here, we should approach it methodically," he explained, positioning the chisel at the mortar surrounding the stone. He worked carefully, chipping away at the crumbling mortar until the stone loosened. With a final tap, it fell forward. Dr. Reed caught it and set it aside. Behind the stone was a dark space, roughly 2 feet square. Dr. Reed shone his flashlight inside, revealing a small cavity in the earth. And nestled within that space were the remains of a child, a small skeleton, curled in a fetal position, wearing the tattered remnants of what might once have been a white dress with a blue sash. I stumbled backward, a cry escaping my lips. Dr. Reed remained professional, but his face had paled. "It appears you were right," he said softly. "This is likely Lily Blackwell." Amidst the bones was a small object, a locket, tarnished but intact. And carved into the wall of the cavity were desperate scratch marks, as if the child had tried to claw her way out. The temperature in the cellar plummeted suddenly. The flashlight beam wavered, then died. Dr. Reed's instruments emitted a high-pitched whine before going silent. In the darkness, I heard a child's voice, not the manipulative entity from before, but something softer, more authentically childlike. "You found me," it whispered. A gentle blue light emanated from the cavity, illuminating the cellar. Within that light, the translucent figure of a small girl materialized, not the menacing creature from before, but a fragile, sad child with frightened eyes. "Lily?" I whispered. The figure nodded, tears sliding down her transparent cheeks. "I got lost," she said simply. "I found a door to a secret place, but then I couldn't get out. I called and called, but no one heard me." "How did you?" Dr. Reed began, but couldn't finish the question. The little girl's image flickered. "I don't remember dying. Just being alone for a long time. And then the dark thing came. It said it would help me, but it lied. It used me to bring others." "What dark thing?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The cellar groaned around us. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The blue light surrounding Lily dimmed as a deeper shadow gathered behind her. "It's here," she whispered, her image beginning to fade. "It's always been here. Before the house. Before everything." As Lily's ghost faded, the darkness behind her coalesced into a towering shape, vaguely humanoid but wrong in fundamental ways, with too many limbs that bent at impossible angles. Where a face should have been was only a void, a hungry emptiness that seemed to draw in all light. Dr. Reed grabbed my arm. "Run," he commanded. "Now!" We scrambled toward the stairs as the entity unfolded itself fully, filling the cellar with its presence. The steps beneath our feet began to crack and splinter. The very walls seemed to bend inward, as if the entire cellar was contracting around us. "It's trying to trap us," Dr. Reed shouted above the groaning of the house. We burst through the cellar door just as the stairs collapsed behind us. The door slammed shut with such force that it cracked down the middle. From beyond it came a sound no human throat could make, a roar of frustrated hunger and ancient rage. Outside, Olivia was already running toward the house, alerted by the commotion. "What happened? What was that noise?" "We need to call the police," I gasped, still trembling. "We found Lily Blackwell." As we hurried away from the house, I glanced back. In an upstairs window, two figures stood watching, the dark entity, its form now resembling a tall man in outdated clothes, and beside it, the transparent form of Lily, her eyes filled with a sadness no child should ever know. "It won't let her go, will it?" I asked Dr. Reed quietly. "No," he replied, his voice grim. "It's bound her to this place. It needs her to lure others. And now that we've discovered its secret." He didn't need to finish. We both knew the entity would only grow more determined and more dangerous. The house on Willow Street had claimed many victims over the years. I was determined that Lily Blackwell would be the last. When does a house stop being a shelter and become a prison? The police arrived within 30 minutes, two officers who introduced themselves as Rodriguez and Mitchell. They listened to our story with professional skepticism, jotting notes and exchanging glances. "Let me get this straight," Officer Rodriguez said. "You believe you found the remains of a girl who disappeared over 100 years ago?" "I know how it sounds," I admitted. "But she's there, in the wall cavity in the cellar." Officer Mitchell sighed. "Ma'am, we take reports of human remains very seriously. But we need to verify before calling in forensics." They followed us to the cellar door, which now remained firmly shut despite their efforts to open it. The wood had somehow warped in the short time since our escape, the frame distorted as if by extreme heat. "That's not normal," Dr. Reed murmured. "It's resisting." After several attempts with the crowbar, the officers finally forced the door open. The staircase beyond had completely collapsed, leaving only darkness below. We'll need to get equipment to access the cellar safely, Officer Rodriguez decided. I'm calling this in. Within hours, the quiet street transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Police vehicles, forensic vans, and eventually a news crew gathered outside the house. Temporary lighting and a ladder were set up to access the cellar. I watched from across the street with Olivia and Dr. Reed as the forensic team descended. They emerged 40 minutes later, grim-faced, carrying a small bundle wrapped in black plastic. Detective Jane Wallace, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached us. We've recovered what appear to be child-sized human remains, she confirmed. Given the condition and apparent age, this will require specialized forensic archaeology. Can you tell me again how you discovered this? I hesitated, looking at Dr. Reed. The true story would sound insane to law enforcement. Ms. Wright hired me to investigate some structural concerns in the cellar, Dr. Reed smoothly interjected. The stone appeared out of place. Pure luck, really. Detective Wallace didn't seem entirely convinced but nodded. We'll need formal statements from both of you. As night fell, the police maintained a presence at the house, setting up crime scene tape and floodlights. Olivia insisted I stay at her apartment, and I gratefully accepted, unable to imagine spending another night in that house. But as I dozed fitfully on Olivia's couch, I dreamed of Lily again, her small, ghostly form standing at the foot of my makeshift bed. It's angry, she whispered. It knows what you did. I jolted awake, heart racing. The dream had felt so real. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Wallace. Need to speak with you ASAP. Officer Ramirez hospitalized. Incident at your house. Olivia drove me back at dawn. The scene that greeted us was chaos. An ambulance was just departing, lights flashing. Detective Wallace looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. What happened? I demanded. Officer Ramirez was doing a walkthrough last night, she explained grimly. According to his partner, he went into the basement alone to check something. They heard him scream and found him at the bottom of the makeshift ladder, unconscious. When he came to briefly in the ambulance, he was incoherent. Kept talking about hands coming from the walls. A chill ran through me. Is he going to be okay? They think so. Concussion, some cuts and bruises. Detective Wallace studied my face. Ms. Wright, is there something about this house you're not telling me? The previous owners left under unusual circumstances as well. Something about hearing voices. I took a deep breath. Detective, what I'm about to tell you will sound crazy, but I swear it's the truth. For the next hour, I explained everything, the crying, the manifestations, Lily's appearance, and the dark entity that had tried to trap us. To my surprise, Detective Wallace listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. 23 years on the force, she finally said, and I've seen things I can't explain. Things that don't fit into police reports or logical explanations. She hesitated. My grandmother was what you might call sensitive to these things. She would have said this house has a hungry spirit. What do we do now? I asked. From a police perspective, we investigate the remains. Determine cause of death if possible, though after so long. She shrugged. But unofficially, this house needs cleansing. Or destroying. The forensic results came back 3 days later. The remains were indeed those of a female child, approximately 8 years old, deceased for over a century. Fabric remnants matched the description of what Lily Blackwell had been wearing when she disappeared. A DNA comparison with descendants of the Blackwell family confirmed her identity. Cause of death: suffocation and dehydration. She had been walled up alive. Further investigation of historical records revealed a dark secret. Joseph Blackwell had not been the upstanding merchant portrayed in public. Private journals discovered in a family member's attic detailed his occult interests and experiments with entities beyond the veil. His wife Adelaide's suicide note, previously suppressed, contained accusations that Joseph had sacrificed their daughter to feed the thing beneath the house. The house on Willow Street, it seemed, had been built on ground considered sacred or cursed by indigenous peoples long before European settlement. Joseph Blackwell had known this and chosen the location deliberately. Throughout this investigation, the paranormal activity in the house intensified. Construction workers brought in to repair the cellar reported tools disappearing, unexplained cold spots, and disembodied voices. 3 quit in the first week. One suffered a broken arm when a beam inexplicably fell on him. Dr. Reed continued his research, bringing in colleagues from various disciplines, historians, mediums, religious officials. They concluded that the entity was indeed ancient, predating human settlement. It had been dormant until Joseph Blackwell's rituals awakened it. Lily's death, her fear, her suffering, had given it strength, and it had used her spirit as bait ever since. It's a parasite, Dr. Reed explained one evening as we met with Detective Wallace and a local priest, Father Collins, in Olivia's living room. It feeds on negative emotions, fear, grief, pain. And it's learned to cultivate those emotions by manipulating human behavior. So what's our plan? Detective Wallace asked. Father Collins cleared his throat. In my tradition, we would perform an exorcism, but this entity isn't demonic in the traditional sense. It's more elemental. What about Lily? I asked. The question that had haunted me since the discovery. Can we help her move on? Dr. Reed exchanged glances with Father Collins. That's our primary goal. If we can free Lily's spirit, it might weaken the entity significantly. It's been using her as an anchor in our world. The plan they devised was a combination of scientific methodology and ancient ritual. A formal burial for Lily's remains, combined with a cleansing ceremony at the house itself. Representatives from multiple faith traditions would participate, along with Dr. Reed's equipment to monitor paranormal activity. On a cool October morning, we gathered at Millhaven Cemetery. Lily's small coffin, donated by a local funeral home, was lowered into the ground beside her mother's grave. Father Collins led prayers, joined by a rabbi, an imam, and a Native American elder who had responded to Dr. Reed's call for assistance. As the first handful of earth fell on the coffin, a wind picked up, swirling leaves around us. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw Lily standing among the gravestones, watching with solemn eyes. But the true test would come that evening, when we returned to the house on Willow Street for the cleansing ritual. Dr. Reed had spent days preparing the house, placing protective symbols and monitoring equipment throughout. Salt lines crossed thresholds and windowsills. Candles made with specific herbs stood ready to be lit. The cellar door had been removed entirely, leaving an open maw that seemed to exhale cold air into the hallway. Once we began, we must not stop, the elder, who had introduced himself as Thomas Redfeather, warned us. The entity will fight. It will try to frighten you, try to hurt you. It may appear as loved ones, as Lily, as anyone it thinks might make you hesitate. How will we know if it's working? Detective Wallace asked. She had insisted on being present, though officially she was off duty. "The house will tell us," Father Collins said grimly. As dusk fell, we positioned ourselves throughout the ground floor. Each religious leader took a cardinal direction. Dr. Reed monitored his equipment near the front door, ready to alert us to changes in the energy patterns. Detective Wallace, Olivia, and I stood in the center of the living room, forming a protective triangle. The ritual began with Thomas Redfeather playing a small drum, its heartbeat rhythm filling the space. Father Collins began reciting prayers in Latin, while the rabbi sang in Hebrew and the imam recited verses from the Quran. The languages blended, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. At first, nothing happened. Then, as darkness fully descended outside, the house began to respond. It started with the temperature dropping so rapidly that our breath clouded before us. The candles flickered but didn't go out. A low rumbling came from beneath our feet, as if the foundation itself was groaning. "It's resisting," Dr. Reed called, eyes on his instruments. Energy readings are spiking. Objects began to move, small items at first, books falling from shelves, pictures tilting on walls. Then heavier things, chairs sliding across the floor, a lamp lifting and smashing against the wall. "Stay focused," Thomas Redfeather commanded, never breaking the rhythm of his drum. The cacophony grew. From upstairs came the sound of furniture being overturned. Glass shattered somewhere in the kitchen. The walls began to vibrate, plaster cracking and falling in dusty chunks. And then the voices started, whispers at first, indistinct and multiple, like a crowd murmuring just below the threshold of understanding. They grew louder, more distinct. The voices grew louder, more distinct, resolving into recognizable words: "Stop, leave, mine." They seemed to come from everywhere, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. "It's gathering strength," Dr. Reed warned, his voice tight with concern. "The readings are off the charts." The front door suddenly slammed open, though no wind blew outside. A powerful vacuum-like force pulled at us, trying to draw us out of the protective circle. "Do not break formation," Father Collins shouted above the din. From the cellar came a new sound, a child's cry, achingly familiar. Lily's voice, terrified and pleading. "Help me. Please. It's hurting me." I felt my resolve waver. Every instinct screamed to run to her, to help her. "It's not her," Olivia gripped my arm, steadying me. "Remember what Redfeather said." The crying grew more desperate, punctuated by screams that tore at my heart. Then, abruptly, it changed, deepening, multiplying into a chorus of agonized wails that no human throat could produce. The cellar entrance began to glow with an unhealthy greenish light. From its depths rose a miasma, a swirling darkness that formed and reformed, taking shapes and discarding them: a man, a wolf, a towering shadow with too many limbs, a child with a distorted face. "Lily Blackwell is free," Thomas Redfeather called out, his drumbeat quickening. "Your anchor is gone. You have no place here." The entity shrieked, a sound so primal and filled with rage that several windows shattered simultaneously. It lunged toward our circle, a formless mass of writhing shadows. "Now!" Dr. Reed shouted. In unison, the religious leaders raised their voices, their prayers merging into a wall of sound. Detective Wallace, Olivia, and I joined in, reciting the words we'd been taught, ancient phrases of banishment and cleansing. The entity recoiled as if struck. The house shuddered around us, beams creaking dangerously. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. A crack appeared in the living room floor, running from the cellar entrance toward the front door. "It's working," Dr. Reed called. "The energy pattern is destabilizing." The entity made one last, desperate attempt. It reared up, taking the form of a grotesque parody of Joseph Blackwell, his features distorted with malevolence. "You will join her," it rasped in a voice like grinding stones. "All of you. In the walls. In the dark." It lunged at me specifically, perhaps sensing my connection to Lily. I felt icy fingers brush my face before Thomas Redfeather stepped forward, thrusting a bundle of burning herbs into the entity's core. An unearthly howl filled the house as the entity convulsed, its form dissolving and reforming rapidly. The house itself seemed to scream, the walls bulging inward as if under enormous pressure. "The foundation is compromised," Dr. Reed shouted, eyes on his tablet. "We need to get out." "Not yet," Father Collins called, his voice strained but determined. "We must finish or it will simply go dormant again." The ritual reached its crescendo, all voices united in the final words of banishment. The entity writhed and thrashed, its form growing less substantial by the second. The greenish light from the cellar flared blindingly bright, then winked out like a snuff candle. In that moment of darkness, I felt a small hand slip into mine, cold but gentle. A child's voice, clear and peaceful now, whispered near my ear. "Thank you. I can go home now." When the emergency lights kicked on, the entity was gone. The house groaned around us, timbers splintering. "Out. Now!" Detective Wallace commanded, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the door. We barely made it outside before the first floor collapsed inward, beams crashing down into the cellar below. We watched from the safety of the street as the house on Willow Street, built on secrets and suffering, finally surrendered to its own darkness. Fire trucks arrived minutes later, but there was little to be done. By morning, only the blackened skeleton of the house remained, the cellar a collapsed pit filled with charred debris. As dawn broke, I stood beside Dr. Reed, watching workers erect a safety fence around the ruins. "Is it over?" I asked quietly. "The entity is severely weakened, if not destroyed," he replied. "Without Lily's spirit to anchor it, and with its nest destroyed, it should dissipate over time." "And Lily?" Dr. Reed smiled gently. "I believe she's moved on. The proper burial of her remains and the acknowledgement of her story gave her peace." As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something near the ruined foundation, a small figure in white, smiling and whole. She raised her hand in farewell, then faded into the morning light, finally free from the walls that had imprisoned her for over a century. The darkness had lost its hold on both of us. Is it possible to truly escape the places that have changed us forever? 2 months after the destruction of the house on Willow Street, I stood at Lily Blackwell's grave, placing a small bouquet of white lilies against the new headstone. The cemetery was peaceful in the winter afternoon, a light dusting of snow covering the ground like a blanket. The headstone, paid for by a collection taken up by the residents of Millhaven once the full story emerged, read simply, "Lily Ann Blackwell, 1885 to 1893, lost but now found, may she rest in peace." "I thought I'd find you here," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Detective Wallace approaching, bundled in a heavy coat, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I come every week," I admitted. "It feels important somehow." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The forensic archaeologist finished her report," she said, handing me a manila envelope. "I thought you might want to see it before it goes into the official record." Inside was a detailed analysis of Lily's remains. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what had happened to her. Evidence suggested she had been trapped alive in the wall cavity, with scratch marks on both the stone and her fingertips confirming she had tried desperately to escape. Death would have come slowly, from dehydration and suffocation. "There's also this," Detective Wallace said, holding out a small plastic evidence bag containing the tarnished locket we had found with her remains. "Since there are no direct descendants claiming her effects, and given your connection to the case, I pulled some strings." The locket felt heavy in my palm, weighted with history and tragedy. Carefully, I pried it open. Inside was a miniature daguerreotype photograph of Lily, a solemn-faced child with serious eyes and dark hair tied with a ribbon. She looked directly at the camera, a small, uncertain smile on her lips. "Thank you," I whispered, closing my hand around the locket. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Detective Wallace asked as we walked slowly back through the cemetery. The insurance company had finally settled my claim for the destroyed house, calling it a structural failure. The land itself remained mine, though I couldn't imagine ever building there again. "I've found an apartment in the next town over," I said. "Olivia thinks I should move further away, maybe even back to the city, but you don't feel finished here," Detective Wallace finished for me. I nodded. The truth was, I couldn't leave, not yet. Something still bound me to this place, to Lily's story. Not the dark entity, which appeared to be truly gone, but something else, something unresolved. Dr. Reed had returned to his university but called regularly to check on me and update me on his research. He was writing a paper about the Blackwell case, careful to frame it in academic terms that wouldn't destroy his reputation. The land has history beyond what happened to Lily, he had told me during our last conversation. The indigenous people avoided that location for centuries before settlers arrived. There are legends of a hungry place where the ground itself was said to consume the unwary. I had commissioned a thorough historical investigation of Joseph Blackwell. The results painted a picture of a man obsessed with the occult, who had deliberately built his home on land rumored to be a thin place between worlds. His journals, recovered from distant relatives, contained disturbing references to feeding the darkness and sacrifices required. Had he deliberately sacrificed his youngest daughter? The evidence suggested so. His subsequent suicide, not widely reported at the time due to the stigma, indicated possible remorse or, more chillingly, that he had intended to join whatever force he had awakened. "What will happen to the property?" Detective Wallace asked, bringing me back to the present. "I'm donating it to the town, with the condition it be turned into a small memorial park," I explained. "No structures, just trees and a garden. And a plaque for Lily." She nodded approvingly. A fitting memorial. That evening, I sat in my temporary apartment, sifting through the documents I had collected about the Blackwell family. Adelaide Blackwell's journal, discovered in the town archives, revealed a woman increasingly terrified of her husband's obsessions. "Joseph spends hours in the cellar," she had written in 1892. "He speaks to something there, thinks I cannot hear. When I ask, he says it is business matters, but there is a wildness in his eyes that frightens me. He watches Lily with such strange intensity. Last night I found him standing over her bed while she slept. And later, just weeks before Lily's disappearance, the house feels wrong. The walls seem to breathe sometimes. Lily says she hears whispering from the vents, voices promising her treasures and secrets if she will come down to the cellar alone. I have forbidden her to go near that place." The final entry, dated the day after Lily vanished, she is in the walls. I can hear her crying. Joseph says I imagine things, but I know my child's voice. He will not let me call the police again. There is something monstrous happening in this house, and I fear my husband has done the unthinkable. Adelaide had killed herself a year later, leaving a note that simply read, "I go to find my daughter. May God forgive us all." As I read these words, written in Adelaide's increasingly frantic hand, I felt a profound sadness. An entire family destroyed, generations affected by one man's dark obsession. My phone rang, startling me from these grim thoughts. It was Olivia. "You need to come over," she said without preamble. "There's someone here you should meet." Intrigued, I drove to Olivia's house, where I found her sitting in the living room with an elderly woman I didn't recognize. The woman was at least 90, with sharp eyes and gnarled hands that gripped a carved wooden cane. "Eleanor, this is Margaret Thornton," Olivia introduced us. She contacted me after seeing the story about the Blackwell house in the newspaper. Margaret fixed me with a penetrating stare. "You're the one who found Lily," she stated rather than asked. "Yes," I confirmed, sitting across from her. "Did you know her?" "Not personally," Margaret said with a small smile. "I'm not quite that old. But Joseph Blackwell was my great-grandfather's brother." My breath caught. "You're related to the Blackwells?" She nodded grimly. "A connection my family tried to hide for generations. There was so much shame, so many whispers. But family stories persist, even when people try to bury them." For the next hour, Margaret shared what she knew, family secrets passed down in hushed tones. Joseph Blackwell had been involved in a secretive occult group that believed in communicating with entities from beyond our reality. They had deliberately chosen locations of supposed mystical power for their homes and meeting places. The land where the house stood was special to them, Margaret explained. They believed it was a gateway of sorts. Joseph was tasked with preparing it. Preparing it how? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. The ritual required a sacrifice. Someone pure. Someone innocent. She paused, composing herself. Family lore says he didn't intend it to be Lily at first. But the entity, whatever it was, specifically demanded her. The horror of it struck me anew. A father sacrificing his own child to an ancient, hungry darkness. "There's something else," Margaret said, reaching into her handbag. "Something I think belongs with you now." She withdrew a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. This was Adelaide's private diary, different from the one in the archives. It was passed to her sister after her death, and eventually came to me. "I think you should have it." The diary contained Adelaide's most private thoughts, her growing realization of what her husband had done, her desperate attempts to communicate with Lily's spirit, and finally, her decision to join her daughter in death. But it also contained something unexpected, a possible ritual for cleansing the land. She researched ways to undo what Joseph had done, Margaret explained. This ritual was given to her by a woman who practiced folk magic. Adelaide never performed it, she lost hope first. The ritual involved salting the earth, planting specific herbs known for their protective properties, and a ceremony to be performed at dawn on the spring equinox. "Do you think it would work?" I asked Dr. Reed over the phone later that night, after scanning and sending him the relevant pages. "It's consistent with purification rituals from several traditions," he replied thoughtfully. "The timing is significant. The equinox represents balance, a counter to the chaos the entity embodies. The salt and herbs have been used in protective magic across cultures. So it's worth trying?" "I think so," he said. "Even if the entity is gone, cleansing the land could ensure it never returns." and it might give you the closure you're seeking. The winter passed slowly. I threw myself into researching Adelaide's ritual, consulting with Dr. Reed and others who understood such matters. Thomas Redfeather agreed to participate, bringing his knowledge of indigenous purification ceremonies. During those months, I often dreamed of Lily, not the terrified ghost trapped in the walls, but a peaceful child playing in sunlit fields. In one recurring dream, she looked directly at me and said, "It's not your fault." Some darkness reaches across time. When I mentioned these dreams to Dr. Reed, he nodded thoughtfully. Trauma can create connections that transcend ordinary understanding. You and Lily are linked now, across the years. Finally, the spring equinox arrived, March 20th, a day of perfect balance between light and darkness. Before dawn, we gathered at the vacant lot where the house had once stood, myself, Dr. Reed, Thomas Redfeather, Father Collins, and Detective Wallace, who had requested to be present off the record. The ruined foundation had been filled in, leaving only bare earth surrounded by the skeletons of dead trees. The neighborhood was quiet, most residents still asleep. We began with Thomas Redfeather creating a sacred circle, walking the perimeter of the property while burning sage and sweetgrass. Father Collins followed, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers of purification. Dr. Reed had suggested modifications to Adelaide's ritual, incorporating elements from various traditions. We each carried a small burlap bag containing salt mixed with protective herbs, lavender, rosemary, rue, and angelica root. We walked clockwise, Thomas Redfeather instructed. Think of light, of cleansing, of release. As the eastern sky began to lighten, we moved slowly around the property, sprinkling the salt mixture and reciting the words Adelaide had recorded. What was bound is now released. What was darkened now sees light. This ground is cleansed, this space made whole. At the center of the property, we had dug a small pit. Into it, we placed symbolic items, a child's button boot similar to the one found with Lily's remains, a copy of her photograph, dried white lilies, and a letter I had written telling her story and acknowledging her suffering. As the first rays of sun broke over the horizon, Thomas Redfeather lit the contents of the pit. Flames leapt up, bright against the dim morning light. The fire transforms, he said. It carries our intentions upward, releasing what has been held too long. We stood in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. The air felt different somehow, lighter, fresher. "Look," Detective Wallace whispered, pointing. At the edge of the property stood a translucent figure, Lily, in a clean white dress, her hair neatly braided. She smiled and raised her hand in farewell. Beside her appeared another figure, a woman in Victorian dress who could only be Adelaide. Mother and daughter, reunited, their forms glowing with soft light. They held each other's hands and slowly faded as the sun rose fully above the horizon. 6 months later, the memorial garden was completed. Simple and peaceful, with flowering trees, benches, and a small bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Lillian Blackwell and all children who suffer in silence, may this place of former darkness now bring light and peace." I visit often, sometimes bringing fresh flowers for the small stone angel that marks the center of the garden. The neighbors say the place feels blessed now. Children play there without fear. Birds nest in the young trees. Dr. Reed's paper on the psychological and paranormal aspects of the Blackwell case was published in a respected journal, carefully framed to protect his academic standing while still telling the truth of what happened. He's planning a book, with my assistance, documenting the full story. Detective Wallace retired from the police force last month. She stops by occasionally, and we sit in the garden, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. I still wear Lily's locket on a chain around my neck. On quiet nights, I sometimes open it and look at her solemn little face, promising her she's not forgotten. The darkness that lurked beneath the Blackwell house is gone, but its story, and Lily's, remains, a reminder that some battles must be fought across generations, and that bringing light to hidden places is the most important work we can do. Last week, a young mother approached me as I sat in the garden. Her daughter, about 8 years old, played nearby, weaving dandelions into chains. "Are you the one?" the woman asked hesitantly. "The one who found the little girl on the walls?" I nodded, wondering what would come next. "Thank you," she said simply. "My daughter used to have nightmares about this place when it was just an empty lot. She'd wake up crying about the girl who couldn't get out. But since the garden, the nightmares have stopped." As if hearing herself mentioned, the child looked up and waved at me, her smile bright in the afternoon sun. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw another child standing beside her, equally bright, equally free. Some hauntings never completely end. They transform. They become stories, warnings, lessons. Lily Blackwell was trapped for generations in darkness, her story untold. Now she is free, and so am I. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light fades and shadows lengthen across the garden that was once a house of horror, I think I hear a child's laughter, not frightening now, but joyful, liberated. And I whisper back, "Sleep well, Lily. You're home now." Have you ever heard a melody so haunting that it seemed to reach into your very soul, stirring memories that never belonged to you? The concert hall stood like a weathered sentinel against the darkening sky, its Victorian architecture a testament to a bygone era. I pulled my jacket tighter as I approached the imposing structure, wondering why I had been so drawn to this obscure musical event. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly in my mailbox 3 days ago, an elegant cream-colored card with ornate script announcing a special midnight performance of lost compositions at the long-abandoned Blackwell Concert Hall. My name is Thomas Harrington, a music professor at the local university with a particular interest in forgotten composers of the 19th century. Colleagues call me obsessive, even reclusive, but I prefer to think of myself as dedicated. When the invitation mentioned pieces never performed since their composer's mysterious disappearance in 1887, how could I resist? As I reached for the tarnished brass door handle, a peculiar sensation crept up my spine, like cold fingers trailing along each vertebra. I dismissed it as anticipation and pushed the heavy oak door open. The foyer was dimly lit by antique wall sconces that cast elongated shadows across the marble floor. Despite the building's apparent abandonment, everything was immaculately clean, too clean, perhaps. No dust, no cobwebs, just a pervasive chill that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Professor Harrington, we've been expecting you." I startled at the voice, turning to find a gaunt man in formal black attire. His face was angular, skin stretched too tightly over prominent cheekbones. I hadn't heard him approach. "I'm Elias," he said with a slight bow. "I'll show you to your seat." "Where are the other guests?" I asked, noticing the empty foyer. Elias's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile. "The others have already been seated. You are the final arrival." He led me through corridors that seemed to stretch farther than the building's exterior should allow. The air grew progressively colder as we walked, and I noticed my breath forming small clouds with each exhalation. Strange for May, even in New England. The auditorium opened before us, a magnificent space with tiered seating and an ornately carved stage. Crimson velvet seats curved in perfect semicircles, and standing in stark contrast to my expectations, nearly every seat was filled. Elias guided me to an empty seat in the third row. As I took my place, I glanced at my neighbors, a woman in period dress to my left, her face partially obscured by a black lace veil, and an elderly gentleman to my right whose fingers drummed a silent rhythm on his knee. "Good evening," I offered to the woman, but she remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the empty stage. The lights dimmed further until only the stage remained illuminated by a single spotlight. A grand piano gleamed at its center, though no performer was yet visible. The audience fell into perfect silence, not the typical rustling, coughing, and whispering of concert-goers, but an absolute, unnatural stillness that made my ears strain for any sound. Then I noticed something odd about my fellow attendees. In the dim light, they appeared almost translucent, as though I could see the velvet seats through their forms. I blinked hard, attributing the illusion to the unusual lighting. A tall, slender figure appeared from stage left, approaching the piano with elegant steps. His face was striking, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and a mouth set in a solemn line. His clothing was formal but dated, reminiscent of late 19th century evening wear. Without introduction or acknowledgement of the audience, he seated himself at the piano, hands hovering momentarily over the keys. Then he began to play. The first note struck something primal within me, a melody so poignant yet unfamiliar that I felt immediately disoriented. It began softly, almost tentatively, like a question posed to the darkness. Each note hung in the air longer than seemed natural, reverberating through the hall and through my body. As the piece progressed, I experienced a strange doubling of perception. I remained seated in the auditorium, yet simultaneously found myself elsewhere, in a dimly lit parlor where a young woman wept over a letter, her tears staining the ink. The melody carried her grief, transforming it into sound. The scene shifted with a discordant chord. Now I stood in a hospital ward, where rows of beds held victims of some unnamed epidemic. The pianist's left hand dropped to the lower register, producing ominous tones that matched the rasping breaths of the dying. I tried to look away, to break free from these visions, but found myself unable to move. My limbs felt leaden, my breathing shallow. The woman beside me remained motionless, but I now noticed a dark stain spreading across the bodice of her dress, something wet and crimson that hadn't been there before. The melody grew more complex, layers of harmonies intertwining like desperate lovers. Each phrase evoked new scenes of tragedy, a child standing before a fresh grave, a man leaping from a bridge into icy waters, a fire consuming a crowded theater while the exits remained locked. These aren't random images, I realized with growing horror. These are memories. His memories. The temperature in the hall plummeted further. My fingers and toes had gone numb, and each breath emerged as a cloud of vapor that didn't quite dissipate, instead hovering before me like miniature ghosts. I tried to stand, to escape the music and the visions it carried, but my body refused to respond. The elderly gentleman beside me turned slowly, fixing me with milky eyes. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the cascading notes. With tremendous effort, I leaned closer. "He plays for us all," the man whispered, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "Every soul that was silenced before its time. Every tragedy forgotten by history. He remembers us through his music." "Who is he?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. The old man's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "Alexander Verlaine. But the better question, Professor, is why are you here? The rest of us." He gestured around the auditorium with a translucent hand. "We have our reasons. A dawning realization crept over me as I looked more carefully at the audience. Their clothing spanned decades: Victorian dresses, Edwardian suits, styles from the 20s through to modern dress, but all bore some mark of violence. A rope burn around a neck, a dark stain over a heart, blue-tinged lips of the drowned. They weren't just audience members. They were the subjects of the music. "I don't belong here," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. The melody reached a fevered intensity, the pianist's fingers flying across the keys with supernatural speed. I felt sweat beading on my forehead despite the freezing temperature. "No one comes to this performance by accident, Professor," the old man said, turning back toward the stage. "The invitation finds those connected to the tragedy, those who need to remember." A fragment of memory flashed through my mind, a yellow newspaper I'd found during my research, chronicling the mysterious disappearance of composer Alexander Verlaine after his family perished in a house fire. Fire that investigators suspected was deliberately set by my great-grandfather, Thomas Harrington, who had stolen Verlaine's compositions and published them as his own. The melody reached its crescendo, and with it came a searing pain in my chest. I gasped, clutching at my heart as the final notes reverberated through the hall. The pianist, Verlaine, lifted his hands from the keys and turned slowly to face the audience. His eyes, dark and bottomless, searched the rows until they found mine. And then he smiled. The applause that followed was not the conventional clapping of hands, but a strange, rhythmic thumping, as though dozens of hearts were beating in perfect synchrony. The sound pulsed through the auditorium, making the floor beneath my feet vibrate. Verlaine stood and bowed, his movements elegant yet unnaturally fluid. When he straightened, his gaze found mine again, and the ghost of a smile played across his lips. "Our second piece," he announced, his voice clear and resonant despite the decades of silence, "is dedicated to those who buried the truth." His words struck me like physical blows. I tried once more to stand, to flee, but invisible restraints seemed to hold me in place. The woman next to me turned her veiled face toward mine, and though I couldn't see her features clearly, I sensed her scrutiny. "You carry his blood," she whispered, her voice like wind through dry grass. "The thief who stole not just music, but lives." "I had nothing to do with that," I protested weakly. "That was over a century ago." "Yet you built your career on his genius," she countered. "Those discoveries of lost compositions that made your reputation, where did you think they came from?" Before I could respond, Verlaine began to play again. This melody was darker from the outset, beginning with a series of minor chords that seemed to swallow light itself. As the music filled the hall, the walls began to transform. The elegant Victorian wallpaper peeled away in strips, revealing charred wood beneath. The smell of smoke filled my nostrils. The music painted images more vivid than the first piece: a stately home consumed by flames, a man fleeing with a portfolio of sheet music clutched to his chest, his laughter audible even over the roaring fire. Inside the burning building, a woman and 3 children desperately trying to escape rooms that had been locked from the outside. My stomach lurched as I recognized the man with the portfolio, his features so similar to those I saw in my mirror each morning. My great-grandfather. The melody grew more frantic, capturing the terror of the trapped family. Each note felt like a nail driven into my skull. I closed my eyes, but the images only grew more intense. I could feel the heat of the flames, hear the screams of the children. "Stop," I gasped. "Please stop." The music continued relentlessly. The audience around me began to change, their forms becoming more solid, more present, while I felt myself growing insubstantial. My hands, when I raised them before my face, had taken on the same translucent quality that had marked the other attendees earlier. The elderly man beside me leaned close again. Music is powerful, Professor Harrington. It preserves what would otherwise be forgotten. It carries truth across time. What's happening to me? I asked, my voice thin and reedy. The exchange, he replied simply. They grow stronger as you fade. Balance, you see. The floor beneath my seat had begun to crack, revealing not the basement or foundation I would have expected, but a vast, swirling darkness. The cracks spread outward, following the contours of the melody as it built toward another crescendo. I became aware of whispers all around me, the audience members murmuring in unison, though I couldn't make out the words. Their voices formed a counterpoint to Verlaine's playing, creating a complex harmonic structure that seemed designed to unravel my very being. The woman beside me removed her veil, revealing a face half beautiful, half charred beyond recognition. Elizabeth Verlaine, she introduced herself. Alexander's wife. I tried to save our children while he was at a performance. Your ancestor made sure we couldn't escape. I'm sorry, I whispered, the inadequacy of the words burning in my throat. Sorry doesn't restore what was taken, she replied. But music can. The cracks in the floor widened, and I felt my chair tilting forward. Below, the darkness had taken on form, writhing shadows that reached upward with eager fingers. The music had become a tempest, notes crashing against each other in beautiful violence. I clutched the armrests, fighting against the inexorable pull of gravity and music. What do you want from me? Elizabeth's ruined lips curved into a smile. Your ancestor stole Alexander's future. Now Alexander will reclaim it through you. The realization struck me with terrible clarity. I wasn't invited as an audience member. I was brought here as an instrument. A vessel. The chair tipped further forward as the floor continued to give way. Around me, the other audience members remained perfectly still in their seats, unaffected by the disintegration of the auditorium. Their eyes followed me, hungry and expectant. In desperation, I wrenched my arm free and reached for Elizabeth, but my hand passed through her as though she were made of smoke. The effort cost me my precarious balance, and I slid forward, tumbling into the abyss that had opened beneath my seat. I fell through darkness, the music following me down. The air grew progressively colder, and images flashed past me, moments from my life, but altered. In these visions, I saw myself discovering the truth about my great-grandfather years ago, finding evidence of his theft and the murders he had committed to conceal it. In these visions, I chose to suppress the truth, to protect my family name and the academic reputation I had built upon stolen genius. But that wasn't what had happened. Was it? Memory and fabrication blurred as I continued to fall. Had I known? Had I suspected and chosen not to investigate further? The music twisted through my thoughts, rearranging them like notes on a staff. After what felt like an eternity, I crashed onto a hard floor. Pain shot through my body, but it felt distant, as though happening to someone else. I struggled to my feet, finding myself in a perfect recreation of my university office. Books lined the walls, volumes on music theory, biographies of composers, and my own published works. I moved to the desk where a leather-bound journal lay open. My journal, though I didn't recognize the handwriting that filled its pages. I found another cache of Verlaine's work today, hidden in the false bottom of great-grandfather's old trunk. These compositions surpass anything in the current repertoire. With minimal alterations, I can present them as newly discovered works from the period. No one will question their provenance, especially with my reputation to validate them. The handwriting shifted as I read, transforming into my own familiar scrawl. Cold dread settled in my stomach as more entries appeared on the page of their own accord, each in my handwriting, each detailing deliberate acts of deception spanning years. "No," I whispered. "This isn't true." "Truth is malleable in the hands of those who control the narrative," came Verlaine's voice from behind me. I spun around to find him leaning against the doorframe, looking more solid than he had on stage. The room temperature plummeted at his presence, my breath clouding before me. "I never stole your work," I protested. "I didn't know about my great-grandfather's crimes." Verlaine pushed away from the door and moved toward me with unnatural grace. Perhaps not. But you've built your life on the foundation he laid, reputation, privilege, accolades, all stemming from his original theft. He reached the desk and ran his fingers over the journal. "The music remembers what humans choose to forget, Professor. Every harmony carries history, every melody preserves memory." "What are you going to do?" I asked, backing away until I hit the bookshelf. Verlaine smiled, a terrible and beautiful expression. "I'm going to play your life, Professor Harrington, note by note. And then we'll see what truth emerges." The office began to shift around us. The walls stretched upward, the ceiling receding until it disappeared entirely. The bookshelves grew taller, wider, until they formed the pipes of an immense pipe organ that surrounded us on all sides. My desk transformed into an ornate console with multiple keyboards and rows of stops. Verlaine took his place on the bench, adjusting it with the precision of a performer preparing for the most important recital of his life. "You'll hear yourself as you truly are," he said, fingers poised above the keys. "Every self-deception, every rationalizing lie you've told yourself. And when the piece concludes, you'll join our audience, another forgotten tragedy for the company to witness." "Wait," I pleaded. "There must be another way. Let me make amends somehow." Verlaine paused, his expression thoughtful. "Amends," he repeated, testing the word. "An interesting proposition." He lowered his hands to his lap and regarded me with those bottomless eyes. "The music has waited over a century for justice. What could you possibly offer that would satisfy its hunger?" I had no answer prepared, but words came to me nonetheless, perhaps from some deeper part of myself that recognized the gravity of this moment. "The truth," I said. "Let me return to the world and tell the true story. Your story. Your music, published under your name. Full acknowledgement of my great-grandfather's crimes." "Many have promised truth when facing judgment," Verlaine observed, "only to embrace convenient lies once the danger has passed." "Then don't release me completely," I countered. "Keep part of me here, as assurance." Interest flickered in Verlaine's expression. "What part would you sacrifice, Professor?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with significance I couldn't fully comprehend. Yet somehow I knew what he was asking, what currency was valid in this exchange. "My music," I whispered, the words tearing from my throat. "Take my ability to hear music. If I can never again experience what I've built my life around, you'll know my commitment is genuine." Verlaine's fingers returned to the keys, playing a soft, questioning phrase. "A fitting symmetry," he acknowledged. "My family perished and my music was stolen. You would live, but surrender the music that gives your life meaning." He played another phrase, this one resolving with haunting finality. "Do we have an agreement?" I asked, hardly daring to breathe. The composer studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, With deliberate movements, he closed the fallboard over the keys. "We have an agreement, Professor Harrington," he said. "But remember, should you fail to honor your word, there will be a second performance. And for that one, you won't be invited as a guest." The pipe organ began to collapse around us, pipes folding on themselves like paper origami. The floor beneath my feet turned to mist, and I was falling again, Verlaine's voice following me down into darkness. "The melody of forgotten souls never truly ends, Professor. It merely waits for new listeners." I tried to respond, but my voice was drowned out by a deafening silence. I woke to the sound of nothing. Not silence, which still carries the ambient noises of existence, the whisper of breath, the rush of blood through veins, the subtle creaking of a building settling. This was a complete absence of sound, an aural void that pressed against my eardrums with tangible weight. I was lying on the steps outside Blackwell Concert Hall, dawn's gray light seeping into the sky. My clothes were damp with dew, as though I had spent the entire night outdoors. Perhaps I had. A jogger passed by, mouth moving in what I assumed was a greeting. I couldn't hear her footfalls on the pavement or her voice. I couldn't hear my own voice when I tried to respond. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, the world tilting precariously. I steadied myself against the iron railing and took several deep breaths I couldn't hear. The events of the night cascaded through my memory, the concert, the audience of the dead, Verlaine's music that carried visions of forgotten tragedies, and our bargain. I had offered my ability to hear music in exchange for my life and the chance to set things right. I hadn't expected to lose all sound. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, pulling it from my pocket. 5 missed calls from my department chair. 12 unread text messages. And the date, I had lost 2 days, not just one night. The screen lit up with an incoming call. I answered instinctively, then realized the futility. I couldn't hear the caller. After a moment of disorientation, I ended the call and typed a text message instead. "Something's happened. I need to see a doctor. I can't hear anything." I staggered down the street toward the hospital 6 blocks away, the world in eerie pantomime around me. Cars passed, their engines silent. People walked by engaging in conversations I couldn't hear. A street musician played guitar on the corner, fingers moving across strings that produced vibrations I could no longer perceive. The emergency room was crowded, but the usual cacophony was absent from me. I wrote my symptoms on a notepad for the triage nurse, who quickly ushered me through to an examination room. Hours passed in a blur of silent tests, hearing assessments, MRI scans, blood work. The neurologist's lips moved carefully as she showed me my scan results, then wrote on a notepad when she realized I couldn't read her lips. "No physical cause found. Your auditory structures are intact and should be functioning normally. This type of sudden hearing loss sometimes occurs from stress or trauma. We'll try a course of steroids, but I must prepare you, there's a chance this could be permanent." I took the prescription with numb fingers, knowing medications would make no difference. This wasn't a medical condition, it was the price of my bargain with Verlaine. 3 days later, I returned to my apartment for the first time since the concert. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, coffee mug in the sink, stack of student papers on the dining table, biography of Tchaikovsky split open on the couch. Yet everything felt fundamentally changed. I moved through the rooms in the bubble of silence that had become my world. My grand piano, a prized possession I had invested in after receiving tenure, stood by the window, early morning light gleaming on its polished surface. With hesitant steps, I approached it and lifted the fallboard. The keys looked the same, alternating black and white, promising order and harmony. I pressed middle C, feeling the key's resistance against my finger. Nothing, not even a hint of vibration, reached me. I struck a discordant cluster of notes with my fist, watching the hammer strike the strings, feeling the instrument vibrate beneath my hands, but hearing absolutely nothing. Tears blurred my vision as the full reality of my situation crystallized. This was my penance, my atonement. With newfound resolve, I moved to my study and booted up my computer. If I couldn't restore what my ancestor had stolen through sound, I would do it through words. I would excavate the truth and give Alexander Verlaine back his name, his work, his legacy. I began with research, digging through digitized archives, property records, and newspaper accounts from the 1880s. The fire that killed the Verlaine family had indeed been ruled an accident, but questions had lingered. My great-grandfather, Thomas Harrington Sr., had published his first original composition just 3 months after the tragedy, a piece that received immediate acclaim for its innovative harmonies and emotional depth. Over the next several weeks, I pieced together a damning narrative. My great-grandfather had been a struggling composer, bitter about his lack of recognition. He had befriended Verlaine, gained his trust, and ultimately betrayed him in the most horrific way imaginable. The most difficult part was tracing the lineage of the compositions, proving which pieces had actually been Verlaine's work. I consulted with colleagues under the guise of historical research, communicating through written notes and text messages. I analyzed original manuscripts for handwriting inconsistencies, paper composition, and ink types. And I found proof, irrefutable evidence that many of the pieces attributed to Thomas Harrington Sr. had been written in Verlaine's hand, with my great-grandfather making only superficial changes before claiming them as his own. The implications for my own career were devastating. 2 of the lost compositions I had discovered and analyzed in my doctoral dissertation weren't merely influenced by Verlaine's style, they were his actual works, hidden away by my family for generations. My department chair was the first person I shared my findings with. I watched her expression transform from confusion to shock as she read through my preliminary report. When she finished, she stared at me with a mixture of horror and pity. "You understand what this means for your reputation?" "For the department," she wrote on a notepad. I nodded, then wrote back, "The truth matters more." She studied me for a long moment before writing, "What happened to you, Thomas? This isn't just about your hearing loss, is it?" I considered how to respond. How could I explain my experience at Blackwell Concert Hall without sounding completely unhinged? The spectral audience, Verlaine's performance, my fall through darkness, and the bargain I had struck, all of it would sound like the desperate fabrications of a man suffering from trauma-induced psychosis. Instead, I wrote, "I need to make this right, for more reasons than I can explain." In the months that followed, I compiled my research into a comprehensive monograph titled "The Silence Composer, Alexander Verlaine and the Theft of Musical Legacy." I included everything: the evidence of my great-grandfather's plagiarism, the suspicious circumstances surrounding the fire, and the subsequent suppression of Verlaine's name from musical history. Reactions from the academic community were mixed. Some colleagues severed ties completely, unwilling to associate with someone who had admitted to building a career on fraudulent foundations. Others expressed cautious support for my courage in coming forward, but I sensed their wariness. The media was less nuanced. "Disgraced musicologist exposes family's criminal past," blurred one headline. "Professor's career goes up in flames like Verlaine family," declared another with tasteless sensationalism. I endured it all in my cocoon of silence, finding an unexpected clarity in the absence of the world's noise. Without auditory distractions, I noticed details I had previously overlooked, The subtle shift in people's expressions when they were being disingenuous, the tension in shoulders that betrayed discomfort, the micro-expressions that revealed true feelings beneath polite veneers. 6 months after the night at Blackwell Concert Hall, I arranged for a special memorial concert featuring Verlaine's works, properly attributed for the first time in over a century. The event would take place at the university's main concert hall, with proceeds establishing a scholarship in Verlaine's name. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had organized a concert I would never hear. On the evening of the performance, I took a seat in the back row, feeling the collective energy of the audience but unable to participate in their experience. As the musicians took the stage, a strange sensation washed over me, a prickling awareness that I was being watched. I turned to find a man seated beside me, though I was certain the seat had been empty moments before. He was elderly but carried himself with dignity, his white hair neatly combed, his suit impeccably tailored if somewhat old-fashioned. When our eyes met, he smiled and extended a handwritten note. "You've kept your word, Professor Harrington." "You do, when tested." A chill ran through me as I recognized him, the elderly gentleman who had sat beside me during Verlaine's performance. I fumbled for my notepad and wrote with unsteady hands. "Is this enough? Have I made amends?" He read my question, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he wrote, "Amends are never finished, merely ongoing. But Alexander is pleased with your efforts thus far." The musicians had begun to play. I could see their movements, the conductor's baton cutting through the air, the violinist's bows dancing across strings. All in perfect silence to my ears. Will I ever hear again? I wrote the question I had been afraid to ask. The man studied me with ancient eyes before writing his response. What was freely given cannot be reclaimed. But perhaps, in time, something new might grow in its place. He stood then, inclining his head in a formal bow before making his way toward the exit. I watched him go, noticing how audience members unconsciously shifted in their seats to make way, though none seemed to actually see him. As the door closed behind him, something extraordinary happened. While the absolute silence remained, I began to sense the music in a different way, not through my ears, but as vibrations that resonated within my chest, subtle currents that moved through the air and touched my skin. Not hearing, but feeling the architecture of Verlaine's composition. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I closed my eyes, surrendering to this new form of perception. The piece being performed was Verlaine's most personal work, the one my great-grandfather had published to greatest acclaim. I recognized its emotional contours now, understanding for the first time that it was an elegy, a father's lament for his lost children. When I opened my eyes again, the audience around me had changed. Interspersed among the living concertgoers were translucent figures, the same spectral audience from Blackwell Concert Hall. Elizabeth Verlaine sat 3 rows ahead, her veiled head tilted attentively toward the stage. Children in Victorian dress leaned against their mothers' shoulders. Men and women from across the decades occupied seats that had appeared empty to conventional perception. They had come to reclaim their composer, to witness his resurrection in the world of the living. At the edge of the stage stood Alexander Verlaine himself, watching the musicians interpret his work. When he turned and met my gaze across the distance, there was no malice in his expression, only a solemn acknowledgement of our shared understanding. The music that had once divided our families now served as the bridge between our worlds. I nodded to him, a gesture of respect and recognition. He returned the nod before his form gradually dissolved into mist that drifted toward the ceiling and disappeared. One by one, the spectral audience members followed suit, fading from view as each movement of the composition concluded. Soon only Elizabeth remained, her veiled face turned toward me in what I sensed was final assessment. I mouthed the words I had never properly expressed. "I'm sorry." She stood, lifted her veil to reveal her fully restored face, beautiful and serene, and pressed her hand to her heart before she too dissolved into the music's embrace. I remained until the final living audience member had departed, sitting alone in the concert hall. The silence that had been my burden now felt more like a gift, a constant reminder of the bargain I had made and the responsibility I carried. Verlaine's legacy would live on through my efforts, through the scholarship bearing his name, through performances of his work around the world. I would never again experience music as I once had, but I had discovered a different kind of listening, one that perceived the emotions and intentions behind the notes rather than the notes themselves. As I finally rose to leave, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the gentle closing of a door between worlds. The melody of Forgotten Souls had found its resolution, at least for now. But in the deepest recesses of my mind, I sensed the truth that Verlaine had shared during our encounter. The melody never truly ends. It merely waits for new listeners. And somewhere in the darkness between notes, it continues to play. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.